All right, y'all, we're live. If you thought we were going to be on time, you're probably new here. But yeah, let's get started.
It's not
Rick,
white people time.
never that, bro. Never
No,
that.
never.
Yeah. Rick, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Rick. I'm I'm Rick from Decolonized Buffalo. I'm Comanche. I have a native law degree, and I talk about decolonization and how Marxism fits into that spectrum of decolonization. So yeah,
Dope, dope, dope. And Derek, you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Derek. I am a black Chamorro Irish communist. I am just a working class guy. Just do lots of manual labor and specializing mostly in cultivation. I do this educational work with Rick here on both his podcast, Decolonized Buffalo, and Post Scarcity podcast. And yeah, that's about it. Like just a working class guy trying to help educate because we have a lot of problem with miseducation and I guess you could just say straight ignorance on, I guess you could say the left and just in general.
100%. And yeah, I recommend everybody go check out Post Scarcity and Decolonized Buffalo. Believe me, like there's nothing quite like it. There really isn't, especially in these like super white dominated spaces where settler colonialism isn't even acknowledged. It's taken, um, for granted, which is kind of where in the moment, debating a liberal Zionist or calling one out in Sam Cedar from the Majority Report called into his show, and just the term settler realism came to me in that moment because the greatest white savior, Michael Brooks, rest in peace, was always pitching Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, and I was just like, well, how do I get this guy to understand what I'm trying to, you know, pitch to him or get him to understand in his supposed support of Palestinians? And settler realism came to mind. And can we talk about like what you've experienced, whether in organizations or just even with talking to other leftists who are white and non-white, in terms of struggling to get them to understand how settler colonialism is like the primary contradiction?
yeah. I mean, like, what is settler realism other than the present day reality, right? It's what the system that is in play. It's all the pillars of settler colonization. Um, that are maintaining power. It's not just capitalism, right? It's not just economics. There's a lot of different pillars. And why is when we talk about the main contradiction or the primary contradiction, we have to talk about Mao. And Mao was the one that says, you have to point out the main contradiction or the primary one, and then you have everything else. We've solved that one. Everything else falls right behind, right?
Mm.
So, during my journey as a Marxist, I was thinking to myself, what is the primary contradiction? You know, and everything. So, we have the base and superstructure, the Marx base and superstructure where Marx thinks the economics controls or, affects everything else. Economics does affect everything else, but economics is not the primary contradiction. The primary contradiction is cellular colonization, but it has many different pillars. You can't just have one pillar, right? So, and in order to get rid of cellular colonization, you have to get rid of all the pillars, or else just like mold, it will come back, right? And for example, we have I'll give one example is Bolivia is when Evo Morales there was a coup against Evo Morales, right, a couple years ago. And I was shocked, right, when that happened. But who were the ones that conducted the coup in Bolivia? It was the right wing, super Christian white Bolivians, right? Because those other pillars, come in and they overthrow, you know, to replace the capitalist pillar, right? So because if you think about just economics and you ignore everything else, the other pillars always try to sneak in, like I said, regrow that capitalist pillar, right? And this is why we have to talk about Christianity and white Eurocentric eugenics, and all the other pillars are, there's all different pillars. But does Derek, do you have anything to say about this, about the main contradiction? You're muted. I don't know if
Yeah.
Derek.
Sorry. Yep. Yeah. Just to bolster your point, Rick. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
You're muted again, bro.
Yeah, sorry. But so yeah, just to bolster your point. Yeah, it's just the principal contradiction is like I like to always bring up Palestine recently because of how relevant it is to today and what's going on right now. Palestine is also a settler colonial situation, right? And when we speak about the contradictions in Palestine, we don't talk in terms of strictly economic class relations, right? Vijay Prashad, actually, as much as a lot of people out here on the left think he's some sort of, I don't know, like, I don't know why the guy's relevant, honestly, because I guess he has some millionaire backers for his media and stuff. But he recently got harangued out here on social media um, for talking about Palestine basically strictly in terms of class. Like he made this comment about the Israeli bourgeoisie, right? And it's like, why are you making these class distinctions within settler colonial society when from the top down, like the bourgeoisie, the the equivalent here would be the quote unquote white working class, the lower classes of settler colonial society, of whites in settler colonial society, the colonizers. Some people like to say they're not colonized. They are. Like if you are not indigenous, and if you are of the of the identity of the colonizers in a settler colony, you're a colonizer. Like it doesn't matter if like settler colonialism has been happening for 500 years, that until those relations are resolved, you're still a colonizer. That so to speak of it in those terms are inherently obfuscatory. For those who don't know that word, it means to obfuscate, to um to not say. It's like an omission, like to omit the truth, to it's very clear what the intentions are behind that. You want to say, like, usually it's because you're trying to say, like, oh well, the white working class, it's not their fault that colonialism is happening. Like that's usually what's behind that kind of rhetoric. And yeah, to speak of a settler colonial situation in those terms of purely economic class distinctions is like it's anti-indigenous. It's purely anti-indigenous. It's tantamount to colonizer apologia. To say that it's like, oh well, if you resolve the economic class contradictions, the settler colonial contradictions go away. And that's basically what we encounter in the white left. They're like, no, you guys, we gotta focus on economic class, like ignore the racial oppression, ignore the settler colonial oppression, the occupation. If we just fix these, and that's how we get the PSLs and the across the settler colonies, all of these party programs of communist parties that don't address the settler colonial situation, for the very obvious reason that white people, colonizers, like that they're averse to that. That elicits a, a a reactionary response in the white population. So of course it's easy to see why they would want to make this obfuscation. But yeah, so that's why. So that to help people understand, that's the primary contradiction when we're talking about Palestine. We're talking about an occupation. We're talking about settler colonialism, and when you come in talking about class, purely economic class contradictions, it's very clear as to what your I guess sensibilities are, what your uh, what your politics are, and it's not that of ours. These are our detractors, basically, people who would say that we're identity politics. You know, that, you know, we get called liberals, whatever kind of revisionist, you know, rainbow capitalist, like whatever, you know, they try, whatever label they try to put on us to try and to try and subvert what we're actually saying, which is just the truth. Sorry, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I do want to say something. So I want to go with what Derek's saying about the name calling. And the reason I'm saying that is because I feel like people don't understand the material conditions on this continent and our critiques of Marxism, right? That they feel like we're anti-Marxist when we're not. We're actually helping settler Marxists understand their own theory, right? And that doesn't sound like stuck up or anything like that. But the point is like I always tell people you have to understand Native history to understand. You have to understand history to understand revolutionary theory, right? And then you need revolutionary theory for a movement, right? And in my point of view, revolutionary theory on this continent is very lacking, right? So first, history, right? You have to go back to the history of federal Indian law to the point of understanding that there's court cases, the Marshall Trilogy, right? And you go to Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, 1831, you see that the U.S. government labeled indigenous nations as the wards and the U.S. government as guardians, right? But this, had a big impact globally, because globally, if you think about it, all settler states, the settler government, they consider themselves the guardians, indigenous nations the wards. Like they care, they watch over, and that's settler colonization. That's a settler colonial relationship. So now, if you move forward and we have revolution in this country, and there's a settler, Marxist party it takes over in power, but then the indigenous nations they have no power. That still leaves the guardian war relationship open, right? I mean, existing. That's still settler colonization. So how do we fix that? Is by having the indigenous governments be the ones in control, right? Which they should be, right? And of course, we should have, like representation for settlers, but not on the federal level, not in the main state level, because that's our positions. And that this includes with the nation of New Africa, and they also fit into, there's equation, there's 574 indigenous nations. Adding one more nation is not gonna hurt anybody, right? They deserve sovereignty and nationhood as well. The descendants of people that were brought here from Africa, via colonization. So I think, all these things it's very simple stuff we talk about, right? This is not like, very elaborate politics. This is very simple stuff. And it just takes the understanding of history, the understanding of indigenous sovereignty, the understanding of material conditions for people to be like, okay, this makes sense. For people to say anything else, or to say that, there's gonna be a, multi.
White genocide. Sorry.
Not only that, that's straight up white supremacist. Yeah.
Yeah.
That talking point is white supremacist. But I think because white people totally outnumber us here, right? But to say that there's going to be a multi-ethnic, multiracial Marxist party and they're going to be the vanguard, that's false. That's still false, because our sovereignty as indigenous nations, it will will fall under that, and that's still settler colonization. Is very basic math, right? There's nothing, like I say, elaborate about this. It's very basic, and indigenous peoples do critique our indigenous governments, but that's for us to do. And whenever there's change going on within the settler Marxist community, there's revolutions are brewing, these indigenous nations are going to be right there along with us. In fact, we've been ahead of the game for a while, right? We run our own governments. We have our own court systems. We have our own laws. We have our own economies, our own infrastructure that we run. I mean, like, we think about it. What Communist Party or Marxist Party runs infrastructure or economies as big as, like, let's say, the Navajo Nation that has 300,000 citizens in their nation. That's a lot of people. What marks it? But does PSL do that? No, they don't. Right. So we have been running systems, and so to say that somebody else is going to come in and tell us how to run, it's a little wrong. And also there's also the concept of the unilinear concept of progress, which which is what Marx thought. But that concept, it went from primitive accumulation to slavery, to feudalism, to capitalist and socialism, right? But that's a European concept, right? Because who is to say that we are we are the ones that are not as modernized as this. They're the ones that just painted that picture. That concept came from the 1600s of Europe, this Enlightenment period, where the Europeans painted themselves as modern and everybody outside Europe as less modern, right? So this concept, it's called colonizing time. Right, so they paint everybody as like, come on, keep up with us or catch up to us, and no matter what we do as non-Europeans, we're always behind. And that's part of something that Marxists don't talk about either, right? We have to respect other people's, other societies, other communities' concept of what is progress, what is modernity. Right. And, we can't just be like, industrialize this, industrialize that. That's what a lot of PASOCs say. Oh, we're going to industrialize Central Canada. Why?
Well, Nazis did too.
Yeah, the Nazis. So it to me is one of those things that all these things are concepts that white Marxists, they really need to understand. Right. They have to read about it. There's a lot of books about this stuff. But whenever you ask white Marxists talk about these concepts, it goes over their heads. Like, I asked a question, I don't want to name names. We had a Native comrade go on a settler Marxist stream, right? And I asked, I was like, what's your thoughts on indigenous people needing to be proletariat before revolution happens? Which is wrong. We shouldn't be considered proletariat, because essentially that concept, it was from 200 years ago. But now, realistically, we're all proletariats to a point. We all have to work, right, in this country. Go ahead.
I just wanted to just because that's something we touched on with Robert Beale in that interview, right?
Yeah.
With Robert Beale is and what my thought had been, and I felt vindicated, right, when he also made this similar comment and observation, that the classical Marxist theorists made this distinction between the industrial proletariat and the what they called the lumpen proletariat, or the peasantry. And to me, that's always been a bourgeois distinction. And it's, I think it comes out of Marx and Lenin, primarily Marx, living in the time of the beginning of the industrial era, in the 1800s. And it's somewhat understandable that these guys are enamored with industrialism. Obviously, industrialism, we get kind of like, they never want to make the hard accusation, but they always allude to that we're anti-civilization, kind of like the anarchists, there should be no, electricity or hospitals for people who have chronic illnesses or something, that all technology is bad, kind of we kind of get painted in that light. Obviously technology has its egregious abuses and there's been massive overdevelopment in certain areas of industrial economies, which is obviously why we're all worried about whether there will be humanity in a few years. But just to say that we get accused of this because we have these these misgivings with the classical idea of where industrialism fits in society, and that it's like basically like the classic Marxists had this view of it being like an entirely progressive force, that the industrial proletariat was the primary, driver of revolution, which Mao proved wrong. Like Mao just flat out, like, after, you could possibly say that, you could say that in the USSR, the Bolshevik Revolution was heavily reliant upon the industrial proletariat as a base for, with revolutionary potential. They're a little, I guess, more educated. That they're metropolitan people who like were engaged in like the politics, because the politics happens in the metropole, right? For the most part, at least in European society. So it somewhat makes sense why Marx had this, was enamored with industrialism, but like at the same time, I think even Marx and Lenin, if they had hindsight, if they were alive today, they would see the excesses of industrialism and they'd be like, oh yeah, industrialism definitely wasn't this entirely progressive force that would lead us to like, that would almost like regardless of what mode of production would lead us to some sort of progress as society. It's quite evident that it led to regression in a lot of senses in society, regression into barbarism, into feudalism. But just to say that, yeah, like, so that this is the Eurocentric idea of progress and modernity, and we obviously don't subscribe to that. And that's something that's like, I think when we're talking about the nuances of dealing with Marxists in general, other, because I don't personally identify myself as a Marxist because I think it's limiting. Like Marx isn't the only theorist that I draw from. I would say I'm just as much Fanonian as I am Marxist, and if anything, possibly more Fanonian than I am a Marxist. And there's all these other theorists that we draw from. So it's like, yeah, Marx and Lenin had their sensibilities that came from the time and the place in which they existed, and that's not universal. That doesn't necessarily apply to all of us. You should have more knowledge than Marx and Lenin this day. You should have more hindsight, and you should have a better idea of what classes have revolutionary potential. These distinctions of industrial proletariat and lumpen proletariat peasantry have almost entirely blurred to this day. There's not really those distinctions don't even really exist in today's era. So yeah, just wanted to bolster your point there, Rick. Sorry, I thought it was really important actually.
No, I like when you come in. Yeah, because I really do feel like I miss out stuff too. And this is what's good about having comrades. It's like, they fill in the blanks that you missed out. I think this is why Derek and I work so well, is that he, first off, he has stuff that I don't know and vice versa. So it's good, Don't worry, you never have to apologize. But I do want to say that turning indigenous peoples into proletariat is assimilating us into the Western, Westernization. I can't even talk right now. Oh man, Westernization, right? So I think by doing that and saying that we have to be proletariat is problematic. It's very colonial, right? So, I hope we answered your question. I think going back to Derek's conversation about Robert Beale, a book that's very highly recommended by us is Eurocentrism and the Communist Movement, right, by Robert Beale. And he wrote this in the 80s, right? And I read this just last year, and I Googled Robert Beale. I Googled that book, and we did an interview with him a month or two ago, and we were the first ones to ever interview Robert about his book. You have to think about it. If his book has been around in the 80s, that means Marxists in general ignored his book, right? It shows you where their priorities are. Because here's a man that wrote this really awesome piece, right, about critiquing Eurocentrism within Marxism, and it's nobody's really talking about it, right? And I think that book should be read before you read Marx and Lenin and Mao, right? It should be read before, so you understand what you're getting yourself into. I think um, also reading The Principal Contradiction by Torquil Lawson, right? It's a good book too, because that one really helps you to understand contradictions and dialectical materialism, which is the essentials, right? But I think people should be reading not only Marxist theories, but Black and Indigenous scholars and books and decolonial radicals, everything, because we are addressing. No, we don't have to. Even Robert Beale says that in his book, that even Black people or Native people don't have to be Marxists for us to be addressing telecolonization. We like for it's to me it's ironic, right? Because dialectical materialism is a tool, it's a mathematical formula in my point of view to understand, to help you analyze the material conditions, right? To figure out which one is the primary contradiction. So this is what Europeans need to do to analyze, right? They give themselves the tool, which is fine, it's good, right? But Native people or Black people, we don't really need that because we're telling you what we're dealing with, right? We're telling you all the stuff we're dealing with within settler colonization, all the different kinds of oppression, how it's happening to us. And I feel like a lot of settler Marxists, what they do is they read just Marxist text and they ignore everything else because it's not Marxist. And that's a problem, right? So, yeah. Hope you answered your question.
No, thank you for that. And yeah, the dogmatism is real. And I just want to add, like, for anybody watching this, like, this is why I love these guys. I could just shut up and just be educated, which is something that a lot of white people struggle with. Let's be honest. But I do want to pull something up just in reference to what was being shared. Kind of just highlighting the fact that, like, this isn't like something that is unaccessible to these people. I think a lot of it is cognitive dissonance of wanting to view themselves as the hero of the story, right? So you ignore the settler colonial aspect of it in order just to focus on, oh, it's a proletariat revolution. So I'm not guilty of, benefiting from the system because I'm simply just another proletariat. And here, from Wretched of the Earth, which again it's not like you mentioned the Eurocentric. What was the name of the book? I'm sorry, Eurocentrism and the Communist Movement.
Yeah, by Robert Beale.
Right, like I've never heard of that book until you started sharing it. It's a book that, from what you're stating to me, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was purposely ignored, not just accidentally, right? To benefit this white notion of revolution. But this is straight from like Wretched of the Earth. This isn't some obscure book, and this isn't even like deep within it. It's just, this is right away. What page is this? Sorry, let me pull this up. This page 5, and he literally states, this compartmentalized world, this world divided into two, is inhabited by different species. The singularity of the colonial context lies in the fact that economic reality, inequality, and enormous disparities in lifestyles never manage to mask the human reality. Looking at the immediacies of the colonial context, it is clear that what divides this world is first and foremost what species, what race one belongs to. In the colonies, the economic infrastructure is also a superstructure. The cause is effect. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you are rich. This is why a Marxist analysis should always be slightly stretched when it comes to addressing the colonial issue. It is not just the concept of the pre-capitalist society, so effectively studied by Marx, which needs to be re-examined here. The serf is essentially different from the knight, but a reference to divine right is needed to justify this difference in status. In the colonies, the foreigner imposed himself using his cannons and machines. Despite the success of his pacification, in spite of his appropriation, the colonist always remains a foreigner. It is not the factories, the estates, the bank account, which primarily characterizes the ruling class. The ruling species is first and foremost the outsider from elsewhere, the different from the indigenous population, the others. So I just want to highlight that because it's it's right there. It's not an obscure text. It's not deep within it. Like if you just gave it a glance, you would run into this page. Right?
It's like in the first chapter, right?
Yeah, it's like literally like within the first 10 pages.
Yeah.
So there is no excuse for this other than that cognitive dissonance, that willingness to hold a Eurocentric worldview, even in regards to revolution. So yeah, what you're saying, for me, the more I learn about it, because it wasn't like I grew up with this. Like I had to learn the same way that I had to learn about Marxism and communism. I had to learn about decolonization. So for me, there is no excuse other than this inherent white supremacist like affiliation, like allegiance, right? But that's just like, I know the word like white nationalist gets thrown around a lot, but I think it's not thrown around specifically for people who uphold this Eurocentric worldview, claiming to be revolutionaries.
Can I say something real quick?
Please.
Yeah, that's the thing about settler leftist, settler Marxist, is that they point at like Midwestern Marx, Haas, or these other Pat Sock, Hinkle. These people are, in my point of view, straight up white nationalist, right? Colonial chauvinist. But what they do is say, I'm not as bad as them, so I don't have to critique myself. When they themselves, even though they are critiquing the fascists, right, which is good, they should, is that they also hold colonial chauvinist takes, right? And I think that's a problem. Like we have like white podcasters that make an episode about Midwestern Marx being fucked up, but they themselves say fucked up shit on their podcast. That's like, colonial as fuck, chauvinist as fuck, right? Excuse my language, right?
No,
But
let's call them out by name too, because that's what is it, revolutionary left radio? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing that people, when we critique these people, they'll say, "Hey, look at me! I did an episode about y'all." Like about decolonization is not a metaphor, but that's not good enough, right? You can't just. But that's a whole different conversation about whiteboard podcast industry. But I think what we're saying is like you have to, as a settler, if somebody tells you, "Hey, man, this position is fucked up," it's not to attack you, right? It's to help you grow as a Marxist. So everything me and Derek and others have been saying is to help people grow, right? Because your positions are shitty. Like my point of view, just tearing you down is no good, right? Because I need sellers to be on their shit for us to move forward, So but that's the thing that I want. It's like, yeah, it might sound, it might hurt you a little, but it's not hurt you out of spite, just to say, hey, like, be real, like, let's be real about this, grow up a little, so what's the other part? I forgot. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I know I just wanted to build on that, where as Derek was mentioning earlier, like the accusations of being like a liberal or just like a race reductionist get thrown around a lot. So I hesitate to use this term, but in reality, it's like it's evident where it's white fragility, because go ahead.
Yeah, I remember now. I agree with you. It's actually colonial fragility. Yeah, white fragility.
Right.
It's that people. Okay, so in dialectical materialism, you have to take in all the contradictions, right? And what these settler Marxists are not taking in is the contradictions that settler colonization brought to the table, right? Of all the pillars, even the colonization of time, right? They don't bring that because that's like colonizing, our epistemologies, right? So they colonize that throughout the world. They spread, colonial mindsets. They forced it on us, right? Christianity and being westernized, be more European, to modernize us, which is what colonization is. It's cultural genocide too, right? So they don't take any of this on the table. They don't put this in their in their dialectical materialism analysis. They just ignore it. Because Europeans, the only form of oppression they face is economic. They don't face any other type of oppression. So everything else that they don't know these worlds. They don't know these pillars of settler colonization. They might be like, Mom and Dad, you're super religious. I'm gonna rebel and listen to like heavy metal. That's the most like that's not really oppression, right? So for us, we have our culture being stripped from us. Our language is stripped from us, right? And for them it's just like an option if they want to be a Christian or not. This, you know, or elders went to boarding schools, and a lot of children died in boarding school. You know, how many children were found in mass graves in Canada? I'm pretty sure you find mass graves here in the U.S. too, right? But these are the things that they didn't go through, right? So they don't really, it doesn't really, they might post about it here and there, but it's like, they don't really care about it. So that's why they so hyper focus on economics and not anything else.
Yeah, and that's kind of like as you're mentioning, like there should be a fear of a like Eurocentric proletarian revolution for those that same reason that you just mentioned, where they're unwilling to examine like themselves and their position as settlers within this, um, which means that once, let's say, if they were to gain power, those conditions of indigenous people, of like new Africans, were not fundamentally changed because these people are proving today that they're unwilling to address it within themselves. The anti-indigenous, anti-black, worldview. And I will just add, it's you mentioned rock and roll, like it's one of the reasons why I never really fuck with like punk music, because I'm like, these are just white kids complaining about like, oh, I can't like live the American dream that was promised to me. Right. So we see this mindset in different medias. It does not just in these like quote unquote revolutionary spaces.
If I could say, like, I think it's so important that you guys are talking about this, and it's something I'd like to talk about more. But I guess I think I wasn't talking about it because of getting too much into playing too much into this accusation that we already get of that we're doing culture wars. But this is
Yeah.
why Fanon has like this entire section of Wretched of the Earth talking about negritude and talking about the importance of art in a revolution, like in what kind of art you're making. Like, is it revolutionary art or is it not revolutionary art? And even Mao talks about this as well. So like, yeah, it's easy for white people to think that they're doing counterculture. They'll be in an entirely white space, and it's like, yeah, this is counterculture, and it's like really, it's like fuck you, dad, or whatever their aesthetic is, and it's like, uh, and it's like, buddy, like you're surrounded by white people at this metal show, right? Or at this punk show. And it's like, and you think this is counterculture? This is just a white subculture. Someone put it this way. I don't remember who it was, but it changed my life. I was like, that's exactly the wording for it. It's like, it's not a counterculture, which is what they think it is. This is like why like you have like Republican senators like listen to Rage Against the Machine, because it's the aesthetic that it's all about. It's like, it's like, still music that's made by and for white people. It's just like kind of has an aesthetic of counterculture, when in reality it is just a subculture. It's just a white subculture.
Yeah. One of the things, so when I was younger, I would, partake a lot in marijuana, right? Which, for anybody that doesn't know, we call it, it's known as marijuana because they wanted to associate it with like
Yeah,
Mexicans,
that's a
right?
racist term.
It's
Yeah,
super
and it's in
racist.
like legal documents. I work in
Exactly.
cannabis, so like I'm a cannabis breeder, and I've also managed and operated commercial cannabis facilities. And yeah, it's all in the legalese, and it's like this is a racist term. I have to tell people all the time, and they're just like, "What are you talking about?" Yeah, marijuana is not is a racist term. Just it's just say cannabis.
Right. And, just a quick aside, I was in a classroom in a community college. I was like drugs and alcohol in society. And the chapter was on like marijuana, right? And so I raised my hand. I go, hey, so this is exactly what you just said. This is a racist term used to associate it with brown people, with Mexicans. I don't think we should be using it in the classroom. And the professor was like, I hear you. You're right. Like, you're correct. But that's the way that the book refers to it. So, that's the way we're going to talk about it, when we could just say cannabis. The professor was, of course, like a white woman. And so it doesn't, but again, that should be addressed. But as an aside, I remember just being just like up there, and they put on Salt Lake City Punk, right? Watching that movie, if y'all haven't seen it, check it out. Like, made me realize at such an early age, before I even started engaging truthfully with like communism or socialism, I'm like, oh, like it's just an aesthetic for these white people. they will align themselves with the state, or they will conform to society once it actually affects them directly. They will sell out, or as if you see in the movie, I didn't sell out, I bought in, right? So we do see this in media and spaces. I think it's hilarious that these right-wing Republicans are listening to Rage Against the Machine, and Zach de la Rocha might be this, might be that, Tom Morello might be this or that, but at the end of the day, if your music gets that popular and these studio executives are profiting off of it, it's because it wasn't doing enough to actually call out and challenge the system.
Salt Lake City Punk is a weird movie because, yeah, you're right. It does show that, like, first off, they're anarchists, right? You couldn't do that with a fucking Marxist teenagers or whatever, because they would become more Marxist as they get older. But this dude that was anarchist just became like a fucking lawyer at the end, or went to law school. I was just like, what the fuck? Yeah.
He did exactly what his parents wanted him to do at the beginning of the film. So it's just like, literally, it's just a phase for them. Now we're seeing this, like you're mentioning, these MAGA communists. We're seeing how socialism, communism is becoming like an aesthetic for white people. I think Hassan Piker has done like incredible damage to making it an aesthetic. It's not an extreme
ContraPoints too, I'd say.
Yes, ContraPoints, exactly. It's not as extreme on the fascist realm as Haas and all these opportunists, but nonetheless, it's still like a watered down, in my opinion, like dangerous propagandistic version of it.
Yeah, I talk about this is why, like, a lot of people, a lot of white podcasters don't like my critique on the white boy podcast industry. First off, they named themselves that. Like, I was looking at their tweets. I'll send it to you. But they named themselves that. I was like, what the fuck? How? Like, but it's true. It's a bunch of white podcasters that are a group of people, right? And they promote each other.
That come from money.
They all grew up comfortably. Yeah. Or they might say, I was like poor, and the Patreon made me, blah, blah, blah. But still, at the end of the day, they are profiting from our struggle, right? Because what happens is they bring in indigenous and black voices, and then they put these interviews behind a paywall, and they get paid. I'm pretty sure they don't pay these guests, right? And then
that would be immoral.
Yeah. And then what happens is they're profiting from these interviews. They're commodifying us. They're commodifying our struggle, and then they're just putting money in their pockets. Like, how many of these people, are actually helping communities that they supposedly, speak about? And that's the problem we have. And then they drowned out, decolonial black and indigenous voices. And if we say stuff that they don't like, they just blacklist us. I'm blacklisted. I know I am. People tell me all the time. And I've also been in these group chats in the whiteboard podcast industry. I do want to tell a story. This is the same thing as my experiences in white, Marxist spaces I've talked about in the past, with I've been in PSL when it first started back in 2004. They didn't understand settler colonization. Same thing with Socialist Party USA back in 2010, right? And I left because they were saying some racist shit. Both of those parties to me are bigots, right? But it's the same thing when a couple of years ago, like 5 years ago, with the whiteboard podcast industry. So I was added to a group chat on Instagram with a bunch of, white memers and podcasters, right? I don't know why that's the thing now, memers. Like, that's like, I'm contributing. It's like that Starship Troopers. I'm doing my part. It's like a memer. And it's like I'm doing my part too, and everybody laughs at that person, right? And it's like, that's like that. It's like, what are you doing? All you do is make memes, right? But Derek has a really good critique about that. But let me finish my stuff before he talks about that part, right? And in this group chat, I was talking about, because they were doing study group and then or starting one, and they were talking about starting with Engels' Origins of the Family. And I was like, Engels is fucking racist. Like, if you read Robert Beale and you read Kevin B. Anderson, they point out Engels was a bigot, right? So in this we actually had like a voice group conversation because I was pissed. I was like, we shouldn't be promoting this work. And they were like, should we just throw Ingalls out? In my point of view, yes. I'm sorry. Right? I'm sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, what
So
did he even contribute? Honestly,
yeah,
like Marx wrote Capital, like he didn't write Capital. Like what
yeah.
did Engels do? Like some of the manifesto, like
He
which is
funded it and
like
claim fucking credit for it.
yeah, he was
Yeah.
just the bourgeois. Like he was a useful idiot.
Yeah. So my thing is like, so then I started talking about in this conversation with a bunch of white podcasters, the history. I was like, hey, you have to go back to Marx and Engels and how they quoted Lewis Henry Morgan, and Lewis Henry Morgan itself. That conversation, he's also a bigot, right? So I was like, so we have to understand that. And then we have to understand the history of anthropology and how that is the roots come from settler colonization. And they were like, it went totally over their heads, right? I was like, look, I'm up here, and your theory, understanding of theory is like the scum under my shield, right? Like, get to my level, or else what the fuck am I doing in space? And it was like a consensus that I was, just being, fucked up or whatever. It's like, no, you as a white person having these platforms and trying to teach people about Marxism, making memes, doesn't really do shit if you're not guiding people in the right place, right? And first off, if you're learning, you shouldn't be an influencer at all. You shouldn't be influencing shit, right? So this motherfucker, so everybody is learning to a point, right?
I would amend that just to say that, like, if you're trying and you're like having a diversity of thought on, and you're not, like, I guess, just racist, like, you can be learning and like produce good content, just like what you're saying, Rick, just like but you're talking about, Rick, you're talking about these white communists, like, kind of
Yeah.
specifically, right? Like, they don't know enough to be pontificating and to be like
Be heard.
proselytizing to people, like the Black Panther Party they were like, yeah, you have to be educated for weeks before we trust you to run down
Yeah.
our party program with other
Yeah.
people. Like, you can't just be come off the street and be like, oh, like, I'm just gonna, like, I think I know well enough what I'm talking about. Like, it takes a lot. Ideological training is rigorous. There's no way around it. That's kind of the big thing, is like, I think in this instant gratification world, colonial world that we live in, where like, white people especially are like, they just don't think they have to do the work. They don't think they have to read an indigenous author or really understand Fanon and read all of Fanon, not just Rich of the Earth. Read on Dying Colonialism, like, and read all of the anti-colonial works. It's like it's really just inherent. It's quite obviously, self-evidently racist that they only want to focus on the classic theorists, the Lenin, the Stalin, the Marx, the Engels. And it's like, if you really think that anti-colonial theorists don't have so much to offer to where they're equally, if not more important than the classic theorists, that's just racist. But yeah, just to your point, Rick, is I think you're right in talking about these guys, like these white boy podcasters. They don't know enough, and if they're going to be at the stage in their education that they're at, which is early, as you're talking about, you've been in it for a while. I've been a communist since like 2009, basically 2010, and like, I've noticed, these people are discovering Michael Hudson for the first time. I've been reading Michael Hudson since 2010, and it's like, and it's like, to a lot of these people, this is new. This is like new stuff. But yeah, it's at their stage that they're at, like, they need to be learning more than they're teaching.
Absolutely.
You want to talk about the memers or whatever? Because you brought up in a group chat about memers and how they don't really do shit. It's like 2 years ago, a year ago, Derek.
Give me one second, sorry, because I just want to kind of play off of that before, because I do want to hear about the memers. That sounds hilarious. I haven't heard about that, but I do want to say, like, so one of the reasons why I started this, I didn't want to stream because I'm like, oh, I'm a baby when it comes to understanding a lot of this. But then I started seeing all these, like you mentioned, all these like white boys that are just talking out of their ass, who are justifying or normalizing this Eurocentric settler mindset. They're not challenging it. And worse, they're profiting off of it. So my setup, everything I got here, let me tell you, like, to put it in this way, I didn't pay for it. I managed to get funds another way to get the setup, right? So, and why did I start streaming? Because I started seeing people normalize liberal Zionists, right? Like Marianne Williamson. And I'm like, wait, nobody's calling this out. And they're thinking just because they're calling for a ceasefire or because they're saying like, oh, Benjamin Netanyahu is bad, like that they're great heroes. Let me call this bullshit out because all these white people are doing it. And why are they comfortable with liberal Zionism? Is because they're comfortable embracing this Eurocentric settler leftist or leftism, right? They're unwilling to challenge it. So when they hear these liberal Zionists, they're like, oh, this sounds fine. This sounds great. Like, because they're their own version of it already here, right? And then when you call it out, especially as you should unapologetically, you do get called like, oh, you're trying to, you get fat jacketed. Oh, you're trying to immediately like turn us against each other. You're causing internal conflict when it's like, no. Like the same way that these individuals speak to liberals, right? Like just they don't mind dragging liberals, making fun of them, mocking them, calling them out for their races, like their northern style racism. They don't mind doing that. But the minute that you call them out, right, unapologetically for their own benefit as self-proclaimed leftists, that's when you're like, oh, you get blacklisted.
Yeah. I do want to say this is why a reason why I came on your stream is also because it's not because you're a streamer or whatever. Like we've met in person, you and I, like things twice so far. Like once at a lecture. Well, no, it wasn't a lecture. It was I don't know, after a lecture, or I'm not sure if you came to a lecture, but in the second time was during my book launch. And you met my wife, you met my kids, right? So I know who you are, and we had conversations about all this stuff before in person. So I know you're not just some like trying to. We had the same conversation about why you started this too in person, and I was like, oh, okay, Carlos, it seems like a good dude, right? So yeah, I tried to come on here before too. I tried to actually do the interview in person with you.
Yeah, Rick thought I had like a studio or whatever. I'm like, bro, like this is in my room. Like I don't have, like, but yeah, and my house is like I live in a beat down house. Like I didn't grow up wealthy like these people who are profiting off of this.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to have met your family and to connect in that way. And I'm still like relatively new to organizing and engaging. Like shout out to Midnight Books. They provide a great space.
They do.
I'm connecting with East LA Brown Bears. Like I'm trying to do the actual work. And one thing that I always say, like on my streams in this channel, is like, I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm not going to, get super chats, Patreon, none of this, if all I'm doing is just flapping my gums, because like you mentioned, like I'm not educated enough to where, I can say like I'm actually contributing to expanding, knowledge. For me, I'm just here to call out these fucking white boys, these rich white boys, for the holes in their analysis, and the fact that they're actually, trying to take money from you, working class people, that are struggling to pay their fucking bills. They're asking you for money, and they're using these parasocial tactics. A lot of these motherfuckers don't organize, don't step out of their house to see how their communities are, and they're calling their Patreon supporters comrades. Like, why would you call somebody who you've never met, who you've never organized with, a comrade just because they're giving you money? It's to create that parasocial relationship and to make your viewers and subscribers and donors think that they're doing something like, oh, that's my comrade, that's my homie. Like, yeah, like I'm engaging in revolution. And it's like, no, you're manipulating them to fill your pockets.
Yeah.
And that's disgusting.
I agree with you. I think that's the reason why I even started Decolonized Buffalo, was because I was having the same fucking conversations 100 times. So I was like, I just record the conversation and post it, right? Because I was tired of repeating myself and like seeing people on the left say the same dumbass shits over and over, and not understanding basic history, of stuff, decolonization and the material conditions. So, I'm not here to post selfies of myself either, or like, look at what I'm doing today, look at everything I'm done, and then just work with people for clout reasons. I think I fucked up in the beginning by trying to work with a lot of these seller podcasts, which I told you, recently, 10 minutes ago, about my experience with that shit. And it was like, what am I doing? I should just work with people that understand, not just for people to get my message out. Because I feel like in this, what I call a game, people are backstabbers, man. They'll use me. People will send me stuff to repost or whatever the hell, but then like a couple posts later, they're posting colonial chauvinist shit. I'm like, why am I reposting you? You get people that are following me think that I'm vouching for you, right, by reposting your stuff, but yet you're posting colonial chauvinist shit, right? And that's a problem. So I think, people might not like what I say, my critiques, but like I said, I'm here to help. I'm not here to just talk shit. And if anybody calls us wreckers, then they don't really understand, or they don't have the standard of theory or liberation as we do. The reason I'm doing this because I want to see our indigenous nations liberated from settler colonization, not just a feel-good solution for settlers can feel good about revolution. Like, oh, what about us? Fuck you. I don't give a fuck. I don't like. I want to say I don't give a fuck about you, but like your shit does not come before mine. I'm sorry. I don't give a fuck. Like I want to be real with you. Your feelings doesn't matter, and if you understand that your feelings don't matter about liberation and abolishing settler colonization, then you really are the comrade of mine. Right. And I've seen a lot of people, and I work with different orgs. I've gone to different study groups. I mean, giving lectures to different organizations across the country. Right. And within that, I watched settlers become so good at defending and fighting for decolonization. And one example is Matt Hunter from CPUSA, from Los Angeles, and other people in San Diego and other people in Texas. And, 20 years ago, I didn't see this much. And even within the last 3 years, I'm seeing this movement grow, the decolonial, communist movement, and it's growing, and I think, in another 5-10 years, we'll see so many more, decolonial, Marxist, communist, whatever movements grow, and to the point where whole parties themselves are going to adapt these policies. In the moment that a national party adapts these policies the right way, that party's going to the future, right? And I hope they do. One of them, becomes the future party, except PSL because they're fucking corrupt. But fuck PSL. But I think, let's be real, they're corrupt. Like, follow the money, right?
Yeah.
And I think, yeah. Go ahead, Derek.
Well,
you're muted, I think.
No, he should be good. Oh, now he's muted.
I can't hear you.
There.
Test.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually I pressed the mute button on my on my headset. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties today. But I was just saying. Sorry, what we were just talking about.
Fuck PSL.
Well,
Fuck
fuck
PSL. They're an adventurous party. Just read Lenin's writings on adventurism, and it should elucidate everything for you. Yeah, Lenin wrote extensively about adventurism and adventurist parties, and they fit that bill perfectly. Just read Lenin's writings on adventurism. I'd say that's all you really need to do.
Yeah, and just to go off what Rick was saying, like sometimes it gets bleak, but fundamentally, like, we have to have revolutionary optimism. And I agree, like, hopefully 5-10 years from now, we see this continued growth of, settlers or white people embracing, anti-colonial and decolonization in their analysis, right? And that's exactly why I would get so enraged with these liberal Zionists. Again, Sam Cedar has over, 1 million subscribers on YouTube. If we're talking strictly about propaganda, like, that's influential, and he's held to a high regard in these white leftist spaces.
He's a leftist?
Yeah, well, he's like a progressive guy, right? And the issue here for me is there's an opportunity right? With what's going on, the genocide in Palestine, right? We're seeing just a plethora, especially amongst the youth, understanding colonialism like never before. Something I'm 30 and I was not aware of it the way that these like high school kids understand it. And there's a reason, that's one of the reasons why they're going so hard after TikTok is because the education that is spreading there. But we have an opportunity here, just as Rick was saying, to see a growth in anti, colonial analysis, embracing that decolonial struggle. But if we allow these, liberal Zionist, liberal settlers to be the mouthpiece or not be challenged in the propaganda that they're spreading, then that whole like trajectory of young people is going to be misled. So you have to challenge it.
I have a comment. So in dialectical materialism, Marxism is a theory, the oppressed versus the oppressors, right? And who are the oppressed on this continent? The colonized, right? And who are the oppressors? The settlers, right? And that the settlers are part of a bigger system, the colonial, system, settler colonization. And when you make revolutionary theory for the oppressed, who should be the voices for that? Should be the colonized. It's very simple, right? And why are white people, white settlers, white leftists, Marxists, whatever, front loading themselves, being the center of attention is beyond me, right? Because they're not going to make revolutionary theory. Revolutionary theory is not going to come from their community on this continent. It's going to come from us. And for us to create this theory, we're going to have to sit on a table together and be like, look, just like we're doing, like this is bullshit, this is what's good, this is what's not, this is what works for us, this is what it doesn't. I understand the history, I understand the material conditions, I understand everything, and then we can make revolutionary theory. Just like Dennis said, without revolutionary theory there could be no revolutionary movement, and there will not be a movement until the colonial theory is finalized on this continent. I'm sorry, it's not going to work, because if we have a communist movement and there's a settler communist party in Czech, we're going to have insurgents, decolonial insurgents fighting that party, right? Straight up. I'll be in the side of the insurgents myself, fighting the settler communists. I will be 100%, because I will refuse. I will refuse to let my land, these nations continue, right? Being oppressed by settler colonization. Like that's the end. I'm done with this shit, and I don't feel like these settlers understand. Like, just like Derek said, Europeans shouldn't have rights outside of Europe. Political rights, political positions,
land rights. Yeah, it's
land
like
right,
you can have like human rights.
Yeah, but not ownership of land, not political positions in these.
Yeah, you don't get a state, you don't get a nation. Like
no, you don't. I'm sorry. You don't. It's not. This is not anti-white. This is pro-indigenous, right?
No, it's just like you're from Europe. Like Europe is your land. Like no one's taking Europe from you. Like stop taking land from other people. Like it's like that simple. It's like if you're not the indigenous people of that land, like that's not your land. Like obviously this is the single exception is displaced, like the massive displacement of Africans from Africa all across the Americas. Like that's literally the only exception, because it's like such a massive, ridiculous phenomenon that, my family was brought here from Africa. And like, that's why, my family's from Louisiana, because that's where my slave family came from. And it's like, that's where our 40 acres was. So it's like we're literally the only exception to the,
Right.
like, to the rule of like, if you're not from, so if that's not your indigenous land, you're not entitled to a nation there or land rights. Like it's literally the only exception is if your family came from slavery and were brought somewhere against their will, and are now just there because that's how fucking slavery and colonialism worked.
Yeah.
Literally the only exception. Every other case, like, why would you just go, like, it's just, to me, I'm just like, would you just like go live in, like, I don't know, pick somewhere like like Cambodia, would you just go and live in Cambodia and be like, I get a nation here because you know what? Because white people are superior. Is usually that's the reason. That's the only reason they have is white supremacy. Um, you know, in Israel, like that's all Theodor Herzl was talking about. He's just like, we're going to make another white nation. This is going to be like a Western country, a white Western country. It had nothing to do with, he was even he was an atheist. Like it had nothing to do with Judaism. Like it has the occupation of Palestine is entirely a white supremacist project. It is explicitly said by Theodor Herzl himself. If like people, you know, like you're talking about, Carlos, this opportunity we have for people to learn about colonialism, and in learning about the history of Palestine and the colonization of Palestine, you learn so much about our situation here and vice versa. Like, you know, I imagine a Palestinian reading about, you know, and learning about the colonial situation of the United States, even honestly more so because they're like, this is the playbook. Like what's happening in you know, Israel's occupation of Palestine is just the playbook that the early European colonization of the Western Hemisphere set for later, like, and then the Nazis obviously hit, you know, you can read that book, Hitler's American Model, where it's very clear that Hitler was just trying to do what white Euro Americans did on this continent, but in, you know, in Eastern Europe and with Lebensraum. And Lebensraum is just a continuation of Manifest Destiny and the Doctrine of Discovery. It's and Terra Nullius. That's the same thing. For those that don't know what Lebensraum is, that's Hitler's policy of expansion, of German expansion, of Germanic people to conquer. You know, when they invaded Russia, they were going to cleanse the land of the Slavs and all of the non-Anglo-Saxons, and so that it could be inhabited by Germanic people. So you know, I guess like Slavs, I guess are considered Germanic, but like, you know, for Anglo Saxons, you know, like non-Slavs, you know, all the other ethnicities of Eastern and Central Europe. So that like Lebensraum came from the American project of Manifest Destiny, and I mean even earlier with the general colonization of the Western Hemisphere under the Catholic Church and the Papal Bull of Terra Nullius. That it's all a continuation of that, which you could say when you get into epistemic colonialism, you could even say it goes back to this, just more of the Crusades, you know, like more of just Europeans having a theocratic idea that they're entitled to land that non-Christians inhabit. So yeah, that's and you know, that's expanded to Judeo-Christians in the case of Israel, where, you know, if you can be a white European Jew and now you're indigenous to Palestine and you get to go colonize it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to say too, really quick, that there's a difference between. So when we talk about decolonization, it's not just on this continent; it's global, right? Because, you know, solar colonization has affected all our continents. This is why, you know, the solar colonization, or the colonization, you know, European global hegemony, colonial hegemony, it started with Africa and then it moved across the globe, right? It's all tied together. Obviously, everybody knows the connection between the colonization of Africa to the colonization of this continent, to the colonization of Asia and China, right? And most people don't know, and I covered this on the podcast on the Hong Kong episode, was that, you know, the Europeans were doing the opium wars and, you know, making money of opium in China, and with that money, they were, you know, transferring all that money to the U.S. and funding the railroads. So we're connected, right? So all our colonization is connected. So decolonization has to be connected too, right? And this is going to be a growing phenomenon. So whenever decolonization is growing, what's going to grow is the aggressiveness of Europe. We're seeing that now, right, upon the world. So when people talk about, this is the other problem with these leftist white influencers, they talk about a multipolar world, right? But in their imagination, capitalism still exists, right? The settler states still exist, and that's the problem. They're imagining a world where we just keep capitalism and the U.S. in check, and that's not good enough. Any real Marxist, any real communist will tell you that global revolution is essential, right? But they need to add global decolonial revolution is essential, right? Because if we don't get rid of capitalism, just like the other pillars, will grow a mold, like a mold, like I said earlier, it's like we'll grow like a mold and regrow the other pillars, right? So capitalism needs to be abolished from this earth completely, right? And the other aspect is that same thing with the settler states. They also need to be abolished throughout the world. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Latin America, South America, right? All those. I mean, it's a lot of fucking work, right? Israel, completely, the settler state of quote unquote Israel. Palestine needs to be free, and if we let one live, it's going to fund the other ones. It's going to back the other ones, just like the West. All the European countries are backing Israel for a reason, right? The settler states are pillars themselves, and they have to maintain the other pillars, right? So, so when we talk about a decolonial person talks about multipolar world, it's just a world without, with all the pillars of settler colonization abolished, not just capitalism, without settler states. And that's what we talk about. That's the two different things. So people hear these podcasters talk about multipolar world. It's different from what we're talking about it. We're on a different level, right, of this shit. And we even hear some of these, white, some of them are not even white. They're just, they're non-white leftist, podcasters, and they talk about how decolonization is not possible, and it's like, how are you a leftist and how are you saying that? Like, how dare you, right? But that's what my spiel. Thank you.
Yeah, they're like, proletariat revolution is possible, but we're gonna draw the line at what's possible when it comes to indigenous people, which is very convenient for them. I do want to go off what Derek was talking about, where Judaism has been used as a shield and weaponized in order to protect the settler colonial Zionist project, which is like, we've seen that time and time again. Like, they're learning off of each other, just as the Nazis learned from the U.S., where we don't talk about Catholicism in the same way that we talk about Judaism when we're examining the conquistadors, right, and the colonization of South America. We don't talk about, like, oh, be careful, you don't want to sound anti-Catholic. So why are we falling for it now in this regard, and just to push against these liberal settlers again, is they're advocating for a one-state solution where it's democratic. And it's like, well, as Derek was talking about, why the hell? Sorry?
You talking about here or where?
No, I'm talking about like these liberals who are advocating for a democratic single state in Israel / Palestine,
okay,
and calling it something different. And for me, it's like, well, that's still like white supremacist as fuck, because you're still advocating for a settler colonial project to exist. You just wanted to evolve in a similar fashion that the United States did, to make you feel more comfortable, so you understand it, in a more comfortable manner, the way you do the United States, instead of seeing like this outright genocide, right? You want to pretend that everything is all hunky dory, in the same way that you're comfortable with the way that the United States turned out. When it's still a settler colonial project, you're not seeing, the bloodshed outright. You've normalized the fact that there's new Africans, Black people, who are in prisons, more of them today than ever were enslaved, right? You're seeing the decimation of indigenous people and reservations, but it's not in your front pages anymore, so you're comfortable with it. And that's what they want to see in Israel, right? That's what they want to see Israel develop too. And this is what they mean by like a one democratic state. Why would you give democracy or a voice to settlers? It's because you want to maintain yours here in the US.
No, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Next question.
Yeah. So unless you have something to add, Derek, I think we should I got like another subject to talk about, I guess. Or
Yeah, no, yeah, we can keep going.
cool.
That's what
I
hour
totally
and a
agree
half.
with everything
One
you
question.
said.
I told you guys I checked in. I'm like, hey, time limits, what's going on? Because I was already kind of like nervous to be like, oh, like you guys are heavy hitters. Like I said, like I'm still learning, and I appreciate your time and the knowledge that y'all spread. But at once I'm like, oh, it's gonna be the both of y'all, like it's gonna be a minute. This is gonna go on for a while. We'll try to limit it because we're already
Yeah.
an hour in. But yeah, so let's just address because I feel like it was essentially settler realism, nativism.
We'll go for hours.
We go
Trust
for
me.
hours on that. I do want to say, Gangs of New York, Martin Scorsese. Although it's not my favorite of his films, like I appreciate that movie so much just because you start seeing how these Europeans truly, in their heart of hearts, and the subconscious, believe that they are native to the land. Like believe that
Oh
they have
yeah.
the right to regulate who is and who isn't an American, which is just deranged and terrifying. Um, but yeah, so can we address a little bit? We touched upon the fact that we have this like settler fragility, and I just want to say, like, for me, when I'm engaging and learning about decolonization, like it wasn't easy or something that didn't require some self-analysis and some kind of like growing pains. So I don't buy that excuse for white people that it makes them uncomfortable. So they don't want to address it directly because I had to do it because I'm first generation Mexican right here in the United States. I understand the colonial history and the contribution that like quote unquote mestizos, right, like myself, contributed. So you see a lot of these proud like Chicanos, Mexican Americans, who are advocating for what essentially is like Chicano nationalism, the resurgence of Aslan, right? Like I had to struggle with the fact that, hey, wait a minute, we contributed to the colonization of this region, right? What we call like the Southwest, when the Spanish in New Spain needed to put bodies in the quote in their frontier, right, to combat and to establish their state and combating the indigenous population, the quote unquote Indios Bravos that they call them, right? So all these like Mexican nationalists, Azteca Aztlan warriors are essentially advocating for the continuation or the reestablishment, I should say, of the New Spain Empire, the colonial settler project in this region. And so for me, it wasn't like just easy being like embracing decolonization from one day to the next. I was like, oh, okay, what role, did essentially my community, my people play in this? I could use a defense that, hey, my family didn't immigrate until like the late 80s. But regardless, I'm talking about the community aspect of it. So I had to challenge. And I've been in those spaces where you're with these old, like, or like wannabe veterano, like OG Chicanos who are like, oh,
Chicano
I'm gonna
sources.
yeah, that I get to speak out and I have street credit because we participated in the walkouts, and so now I could talk about the rebirth of Aslan, and it does put you in positions where not only do you have to self-analyze and reflect in the same way that everybody should, like regarding to your anti-blackness,
Hmm.
your place in the settler colonial project should be analyzed, even if you're not white, and it should be challenged, especially within your community, because they will take you inherently, they will take you more seriously and more of a threat than somebody who is not from their community that they could just ignore and dismiss or pull the race card or whatever it is to silence them. So Rick is like the shit stirrer, the number one guy that I've seen calling out these eagle warriors, these jaguar warriors, these Aslan nationalists. So if you just want to address and just educate us, Rick, on confronting and combating this ideology.
Okay. Yes. I do want to say we have to go back. I don't have any notes, so I might miss some parts. I might blah blah blah. Not be as proficient as when I have my notes in front of me. But we have to go back to the colonization of this continent by Spain specifically. So this is why I cover the colonization of the British and I talk about the Marshall Trilogy, right? The colonization of Spanish were totally different, right? It's very, very different. So they came in with mostly men, but the British brought in their whole families, right? To colonize, and the British started to colonize with legal means, right, with treaties and all that stuff. And Spanish were like convert or die, right? So, but when the Spanish came in, what happened is they brought in enslaved Africans, right? And what they did was they got indigenous peoples from Mexico, shipped them into the Caribbean, and vice versa to mix them up. They got people from the Philippines, indigenous peoples from the Philippines, and brought them here. So they mixed up the indigenous peoples, enslaved them in different places. So it will be harder to revolt. And who talks about this very well? Gerald Horne, right? You have to read Joe Horne, right? But they always mixed up indigenous peoples. So when I talk about, so we have to go back even further, right? Back even further. So before that, the Spanish had 800 years of reconquista, the reconquering of Spain. So they were trying to reconquer Spain, the Christian white Spaniards, right? Which they were like Germanic Goth or something like that. They reconquered Spain for Christianity, and during that time, they invented blood quantum, right? And of course, they won around. They won. They won around 1491, I think. And then the next year they were in the new world, quote unquote, right? And they continued the Reconquista realistically. Same tactics, right? Just like I said, mixing people around. So, when they did the Reconquista, a lot of Muslims in Spain converted into, you either convert or die, or converted and get shipped away into Christianity. So not all Spaniards, the Jews too, and
Jews too, right?
yeah, and the Romani people, all Africans that were living in, and Middle Eastern people that were living in Spain, they had to convert or be shipped away, right, or get killed. So what happened was, when you meet Spaniards, some of them are as my complexion or your complexion, Carlos, is same as us, right? Yeah, realistically. So I think, so so just remember that fact, okay? So let's fast forward, and they had this caste system, from the Catholic Church, and now let's fast forward to the Mexican Revolution, right? So the Mexican Revolution happened, and then who was the first minister of education? Jose Vasconcelos. But what people don't realize is Jose Vasconcelos had a newspaper called Timon, and that newspaper was funded by Nazis, right? The Nazi Party of Germany. So this motherfucker was promoting eugenics in Mexico, right? And how the indigenous people will get is good for breeding between races. There's going to be a superior race in Mexico, a blending of all the races, and it's eugenics. If you read it, it reads like Nazis. It was hard for me to read. I read a couple pages, I'd step away because I was so mad reading it, right? The Raza Cosmica, the cosmic race, written in 1925, right? So, and this was pushed as real academia back then. But you have to realize that Chicano studies departments, academic departments, still push that in their literature. So they're pushing Nazi propaganda to this day in Chicano spaces, right? And let's be honest, I'm calling it out how it is. Chicano studies is promoting Nazism, right? So the Mexican government, with this dude as the head of the Ministry of Education, promoted, and they created something called indigenismo, right, where they race shifted, or they did a settler move to innocence of the whole continent. If people that are listening, you have to understand settler move to innocence. If you read Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Tuck and Yang, right? And you also should read Distorted Descent by Daryl LaRoe. It's even more complex, like understanding how people claim indigeneity wrongfully, right? So what the indigenismo did is paint the whole country as Spanish and indigenous, right? Totally dismissing Black history in Mexico and all the other histories too, but Black history in Mexico. So everybody was like, I'm a little bit indigenous. Once we're all indigenous, no one's indigenous, right? Totally dismissing indigenous sovereignty, indigenous communities in Mexico. So that's been going on for what's this? It's 110 years now, right? So
Did you mention Blanqueamiento?
yeah, that's the mestizaje, where your goal was to marry up in your caste, the wider caste, right? But the caste system, like I said, the caste system is straight bullshit, and it started a while before Mexico, with the Spaniards. But but there's two different mestizos, the white mestizos where you try to go whiter, and and then the mestizos of like different non-white that were mixed up with different colonized communities. But eventually within indigenismo, mestizaje was put into one umbrella of everybody's mixed. But in Mexico, realistically, everybody is mixed. And if you read mestizo genomics, right, it shows you that the Mexican government with the ancestry DNA test and genetics tried to see who's who in Mexico, and everybody, a lot of people had Black ancestry, and a lot of them had indigenous. But at the end of the day, the company itself that worked with the Mexican government, when they were asked who's considered indigenous, the scientists said, whoever's part of an indigenous community. Those are their indigenous people, right? It's not about your past genetics. It's about being part of a native community. It's so simple, because here on this continent and across both American continents, that's how you figure out who's indigenous, is who's in part of a native community. Even the scientists, the indigenismo, current scientists, people in the Mexican states say the same thing, right? So you have to think about 1960 now, fast forward some more, and how the Chicano movement was from, in the 60s in the U.S., from the U.S. Southwest. Oh, let's go back even further, okay? Let's go back to, no. Oh, my bad. I'm sorry. No, 1960s, where the term Aslan was really pushed forward. There's Jack D. Forbes, book where Jack D. Forbes is not a native. He's a pretendian. I actually called the Lenapes. I have friends who are Lenape, and I called their historian. And Jack D. Forbes was a pretendian. So people that quote Jack D. Forbes understand they're just quoting some like Italian dude or whatever the fuck he was, right? That looks native and shit. So I'm sorry if you quote Jack D. Forbes for.
Does he cry when he sees littering?
Yeah,
Yeah, like
He's actually related to Elizabeth Warren, so he.
no.
Yeah, so that's the thing in Buffy St. Marie. But it's one of those things that but we had the term Chicanismo came in the 60s. But what I've been asking this question for 20 years now. Okay, so this is what I got from Chicanos themselves. That everybody had a different answer. What is it? They said it's an ethnicity. It's an experience. It's a political ideology, right? Those three are the three main factors.
It's a mindset, right? Yeah.
What that comes from the political ideology, right? So first off, this ethnicity, we just talked about it. Like, not, you can't, they did the same thing the Mexican state is, claim indigeneity, what a lot of Aztec, fetishizing, and actually, if you read the Neo-Indians, that's free on the share drive, you can see that's fetishizing the Aztecs is also very Eurocentric, because those that native community, the native nation, right, most resembled European nations by big structures, and all this stuff, rather than the smaller native communities. Even though the other ones were more advanced, the Putupecha had metals, right? They did metal works. The Aztecs or the Mexica didn't, right? So they called, even if I forgot, was that the Chicano Manifesto, where it calls the northern indigenous peoples like barbarians or something like that, barbaric, something like that. I have it. I was like, what the fuck is this? So it's one of those things that we have to talk about. So so the term Aslan came from this thing too. But let's go back to ethnicity. So one, we know that being indigenous part of a native community. So ethnicity is not a real thing because even Central Americans claim Chicanismo, and that's a whole rift between Mexicans and Central Americans, right?
That's a
Two,
whole other thing.
yeah, that's a whole different conversation.
It
And
gets crazy.
I agree with Central Americans because the second one is experience, which I agree that should be the main one. But the experience of diaspora within the settler state is everybody. Like everybody that's okay, all Mexicans, you can't say all Mexicans are indigenous, but all Mexicans that come here diaspora face the diaspora experience, right? But not all of them are indigenous. So that experience itself doesn't give you indigeneity. What gives you indigeneity is, again, being part of a native community. You might be diaspora. That's fine. If you're indigenous, that's fine. You're still indigenous here, but you're part of a native community back at home, right? But, native communities in the U.S. has a diaspora experience within the own country itself, because in the 1950s, there was the Indian Removal Act. Right now, 75% of natives in the U.S. are living outside the reservation. 75%, right? So we all, and everybody else that's not indigenous, are diaspora. The settlers are diaspora, and people from across non-European world on here are diaspora. Everybody is fucking diaspora right now, right? So that experience alone, the diaspora experience, doesn't give you indigeneity, right? So the third one is a political ideology. The political ideology itself cannot give you indigeneity, right? So, but I agree, it could be a diaspora experience, right? So, so that this diaspora experience was between settlers. Then we talk about Aslan now, right? It's between settlers. It's Mexican settlers versus American settlers, because when the Mexican-American War happened and it ended 1848, right? The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in the treaty itself, it made a big distinction between Mexican settlers and the indigenous peoples, right? It actually called indigenous peoples savages, right? And the Mexican people that stayed after, the Mexican Revolution as settlers, right? And actually said in the treaty that if a Mexican was held captive by native people, that they would be freed and be sent back to Mexico if they wanted to, right? But who were these natives that were taking Mexican hostages? Us, Comanches, my people, right? So, but that's the thing that a lot of Chicanos can talk about, right? You can't claim indigeneity, between a treaty of two settlers, right? Because that treaty was between two settlers. Let's be real. And they say the border crossed us, we didn't cross the border, and it's like, wait, I'm Comanche, and the border crossed me too, right? Because Texas was Comanche territory, and that shit crossed us as well. And we used to fight we used to fight the Spaniards, and we fought the Mexicans, and we beat both of them, but we're not Chicanos. I'm fucking Comanche, right? So, but like I said, so in 1849, the U.S. or 1848, let me go back. So the U.S. told Mexicans, if you stay here, by 1 year, you'll become a U.S. citizen, right? Or you can go back to Mexico. It's up to you. They gave that choice to Mexican settlers, and the ones that stayed became citizens at 1849. Native Americans weren't citizens until 1925, right? So that's a big distinction too, right? So, in the 1850s, this is when the U.S. government came in to the newly gained, conquered territories from Mexico. It made treaties with the indigenous peoples of this area, right? And that there's 175 indigenous nations to what was once Mexico, right? With treaties, indigenous nations to say, right? And there's a big distinction, right? And what's the other aspect? The other aspect is, if we turn this into Aslan, a territorial Aslan, that's the same thing as giving settler Marxists, white European settlers Marxists, the state and calling, the Guardian War and all that stuff. So we're making Mexican settlers the guardians, indigenous nations the wards again. Right? So Aslan itself is a settler colonial construct. Like I said, it's basic fucking math. I'm sorry. If you don't like it, it's just basic. I'm making this very simple for everybody, right? So Chicano nationalism comes from Mexican nationalism, and Mexican nationalism is a settler colonial project. So when we talk about Chicano nationalism, and we're talking about abolishing settler colonization, we have to abolish all of it, not just keep the ones that makes our friends feel good. I'm sorry. And this includes abolishing the Mexican state and Mexican nationalism, settler nationalism. And Chicano nationalism is going to have to fucking go. We can't just keep it for the sake of your buddy's feelings. I'm sorry. So that's that. So Chicanos, or everybody that's considered Chicano, should self-reflect, right? And think to themselves, fuck, we got, just like American settlers have to self-reflect. Fuck, we have to abolish this, settler fucking nationalisms, right? And if we don't, it's just gonna, it's just continuation of a pillar of settler colonization, and that's gonna grow like mold, and it's gonna make the other pillars come back, right? So, at the end of the day, I kind of like feel like these old Chicanos that were back from like the 60s, they dedicated their whole life to the studies, right? And their whole life realistically has been a lie. It's been they dedicated their life to just promoting a different style of settler colonization. And it sucks. I've thought about, imagining myself in their shoes. I would have a midlife crisis or something. I don't know, buy Corvettes. I don't know, right? And it's like, how would I feel? But this is the same things that American settlers are dealing with too. You can't just give a pass to somebody because they're south of the border. Indigenous sovereignty, indigenous nations need to be in the forefront, even in Mexico and throughout Latin America, right? And this includes the nation of New Africa, because Africans that were brought from Africa forcefully through settler colonization was not just in the U.S. Mexico had as many enslaved Africans brought into Mexico as the U.S., and that's a smaller nation. And there's an even crazier, bigger number in South America. So New Africa realistically transcends the U.S. It's a two-continent nation, right? And that's something that people need to realize as Marxists. New Africa is not just in the U.S. South. No, it's a two-continent thing, right? It's a nation. It's going to be one of the biggest nations, right, on this earth. I think. I don't know how compared to other nations, but let's be real. On this continent, we're going to have their nation is going to have to be that big, right? So, but Chicanos always ask, "What about our nation?" Like I said, we have to abolish that. So. The end.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And this is why it's so important, as was mentioned earlier, to educate yourself on this, to actually learn and do the process, because it's so much history. And that was just like you gave us like the quick version of it, but there's so much to do with like the Spanish caste system that just gets it's fascinating. I know it's like we're essentially you're studying genocide at that point. But it truly is unique in comparison to like Anglo-Europeans, colonization. I mean, the Spanish was just like, I don't. It's
brutal.
It's brutal, but they created so many different pillars and so many different things to like try and justify all their bullshit. That makes
it's much more convoluted, huh?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. I was making it more convoluted, thinking of the word convoluted. I do want to suggest a book as well, American Holocaust by David Stannard. That book was one that surprised me because I really appreciate the fact that before even getting into the American genocide of indigenous people, it establishes an understanding of the pogroms against Jewish people in Europe and the colonization of Ireland, in order to understand like the mentality and the tactics that the Europeans came to the Americas with, and why they were so efficient in their genocide and colonization.
I think too with Gerald Horn, he talks about like the mid 1500s, there were more Africans in Mexico than there were settlers. You have to think about those numbers. Right. So for indigenismo, the concept of indigenismo, of everybody, the duality of Spanish and indigenous, that is very anti-black to claim that, right? When there's so many, the black community in Mexico is a lot bigger than we actually know what it is, right? And a lot of people probably don't know they are indigenous, black, because they think they're indigenous, right? And people always say that, well, I'm a shade of brown, I'm a darker shade of brown. I'm like, well, you could be black. Like, you never know. Everybody was so mixed here to think what they're doing is fetishizing indigeneity, right? Oh, let me go back to about Aztec dance, right? Aztec dance itself, that concept is like indigenismo via dance version. It was created by Florencio Yesca, something like that, and he made it in the 60s, and he brought it Azteca danza to San Diego, right? I think the first student was like Mario Aguilar, something like that. And this that concept of danza Azteca is, they call it a reconquista, which is very ironic to the Spanish word reconquista. So it's the reconquering. So what Florencio imagined was assimilating everybody in Mexico to this pan-indigenous, fake native Aztec culture, right? And that, to me, that itself is genocidal, because now you're trying to assimilate indigenous peoples who have their own culture in Mexico, their own native languages, into an Aztec, fake Aztec pan-indigenous culture with, assimilating them to Nahuatl or some whatever, the Aztec languages, right? And to me, that's fucked up. And then they want to move it up across the border, right, with Chicanos, and now they're playing Aztec, they're playing, hobbyist Aztec Aztec dance. But I met an Aztec dancer in San Antonio and asked her, why do you do this? Why do you do this Aztec dance? And she told me, my goal is to assimilate all the native people on this continent into Aztec danza Azteca. And I was like, that is genocidal. That is like the craziest thing I've ever heard. Because why are you trying to assimilate my people or any other community into this fake native pan-indigenous garbage, right? And for a lot of people, native people here in California, I met the older native people, and they met Florencio, and they were like, this dude's not indigenous. He was not indigenous, right? So I think that's the problem we have, is like this is like it's Nazism. It's a form of Nazism, which would fetishize indigeneity. And I posted this in my stories in Instagram, where you even see Mexicans in Ukraine fighting alongside Ukrainians with a SS skull patch on their uniform with a sombrero. Right? Like Mexican Nazis.
I gotta see that. That's wild.
Yeah, it's the same SS Nazi school, but with a sombrero on it, fighting alongside Nazis. Bro, it's the weirdest shit. It's the weirdest shit, right? And there's a lot of Mexican Nazis. Nazism in Mexico is a real fucking thing, and people dismiss it. So American leftists don't realize how provident this is. I made an episode about neo-Nazi Aztec heavy metal bands in Southern California. That's a very real movement. That's within the neo-Nazi movement. There's fake Aztec, neo-Nazi heavy metal bands. But you don't know about this. They don't know about this because they're so stuck, just like you said, Carlos, into their own white American world. They don't understand that there's other, just like Derek said, the subculture, right? There's another set of settler subculture, which is the in fake Aztec neo-Nazis that people don't know about, but it's very, very real. Mexico is even worse than it is here, right? So yeah.
No, thank you for that. And I would like to add, like, because the Spanish made it so convoluted, like, it's so easy to be misled as you're attempting to, as you mentioned, like, these individuals, these Chicanos, like, scholars, like, just wasted their entire lives to push something that is fundamentally, like, just as racist as what they're claiming to combat. And it's funny because like, this is a real thing. What Rick is describing with like these Nazi Mexicans, I have to see that sombrero. That SS sombrero is insane. It almost sounds like a parody, but it's so true because of how this raza cósmica is so demented. I remember being like in high school, and not being aware of this. And one of my homies who was Salvadorian couldn't grow a mustache, right? So he goes, "Oh, we were edgy kids." He goes, "Next time you shave, send me a picture of it, but like just leave like the Charlie Chaplin Hitler mustache," right? So I was like, "All right, yeah, fine, whatever." And I thought it was funny because I'm like, the joke here being almost, predating Taika Waititi and that movie, something Rabbit.
Yeah, Jojo
Jojo
Rabbit.
Rabbit. I might have to sue him because I think I came up with that first. No, but saying like, "Oh, isn't this hilarious?" Because here I am, like this fucking beaner, like having a Hitler mustache. How crazy is this? Like, how nonsensical is this? It's funny, right? And we laughed about it. And then little did I know that, like, no, there are motherfuckers out there that are
Yeah.
about it and look my complexion, if not darker, and are out here saying like, no, somehow like we fall into into the Germanic race or whatever the fuck. So yeah, you're 100% right. I did want to pull up this article just to highlight the fact of how fucking anti-black and racist Mexico is. This is from The Guardian. This is 3 years old. We exist. We're here. Afro-Mexicans make the census after long struggle for recognition.
I think it was 2020. 2020 was the first time Afro-Mexicans were added in the census, right?
Yeah, so it states here, this year's census, which is being collected through March, marks the first time the country is counting its Afro-Mexican population, providing official recognition for people often overlooked in the Mexican cultural uh, mosaic. So yeah, so I mean, this is how relevant. I know it sounds, especially Rick giving us that rich background to the history. I know it sounds like it's almost like irrelevant or it's in the past. I'm like, no, this is still very much alive in Mexico, and they still want to claim that their struggle there is not about race. Their struggle there is about economics. That's what.
But that's why white leftists,
yeah,
white American leftists say too is, oh, it's not about race. It's the same tactic. So these are just these Mexican settlers, or just, if you compare it, they're just spicy pat socks. Right, that's all they are. They're pat socks.
Yeah.
They're still nationalists, but they're just spicy. So I
think you said paisa first, bro.
No, I said spicy.
Habanero. They're habanero pat socks.
Oh man, yeah, 100%. And thank you for that. And one of the things that you have to combat when you're in these spaces, especially like if you are brown, if you do fall into the category of whatever the hell Chicano is, which highlighting what Rick was talking about, like just the fact alone with the whole, how they're so adamant that Central Americans cannot be Chicanos, right? Or that like they refute because of their anti-Central American sentiments. It just highlights in a very like specific way how fundamentally racist the concept of like Chicano is. Because like, yeah, everything you mentioned is on point. It's just really frustrating that that's still the way that people kind of feel that it's like that's their revolutionary struggle.
I want to say something, okay? So if you go back to the Reconquista, right? If you understand languages, Spanish has a lot of Arabic words. I mean, a lot of Arabic words. So to me, it's ironic that these Mexican Nazis, you can be straight up Arab and think that you're like some Aryan or some shit like that. It's like, what the fuck's wrong with you, right? And they don't understand their own history. They don't understand the history of Spain itself, literal Mexico, for them to so what they do is like they misappropriate indigeneity. And I think it's their downfall. But I think that's what's different between the settler nationalist project, the settler colonial project in Mexico compared to the U.S. U.S. settlers know they're aliens from here. They're not here. They're alien. They're illegal aliens, right? They're not indigenous from here. They know that. They know there's a difference between indigenous peoples and them. They're the colonizers. In Mexico, you have to go back to what I said, the settler moved to innocence. So they get the indigeneity to wash themselves from the title of being a colonizer. And that's the problem, right? And this is why we're seeing a lot of like white people here in the U.S. too that are race shifting, like racial dualism, trying to be black. Because even that, as settler colonization crumbles, we're going to see more and more white people claim to be either native or black in the coming future, right? And one perspective you have to understand, if you read Cersei Sturm's Becoming Indian, there is, I think there's 2 or 3 federally recognized Cherokee, communities, and there's over 200 fake Cherokee uh, groups, right? That tells you the number. And this is Cherokee. There's a lot more different fake native organizations within the U.S. A lot of white people are trying to claim indigeneity to wash themselves from the title of being a colonizer, being a settler. So I think in Mexico, it's just they did it in a national level. You know, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And then just moving on, but still staying in the realm of like that American nationalism, or in that sense, Mexican nationalism. I did kind of want to talk a little bit about the whole like ADOS movement, right? The African descendants of chattel slavery, right? And the way that this is essentially very xenophobic, and we just saw this in like in New York with the whole with the stabbing and the shooting, a black man, you know, believing the propaganda that there's a horde of immigrants coming and threatening you, and they're going to take your life, they're going to rape your women, they're going to take your jobs, all these things. And we start seeing um, even black people swallowing this white supremacist propaganda, right? And I think ADOS has been in the forefront of this. Um,
I have a question.
yep.
Do you consider Candace Owens to be part of that ADOS? Because she swallows a lot of settler nationalist American imperialist bullshit.
Yeah, I don't know if she can calls herself one outright, but essentially, like, yeah, that's somebody who, for all intents and purposes, other than their skin color, is it like essentially might as well be this white nationalist.
So I have a question too, then to Derek, right? So Derek, do you consider that a comprador, or do you consider that um, someone like Candace Owens a comprador, or a different term?
Yeah, no, definitely comprador. And that's like our, black community is rife with contradictions, just like any other like indigenous communities. You have, like the equivalent, the Fort Scouts. We have but basically the Buffalo Soldiers in the black community, the who embrace Americanism. It's more like embracing Americanism that is the problem in the black community, and identifying with basically the settler colony. I don't think it has anything to do with identifying as I identify as a descendant of slavery, and it like we have a unique experience, um, unique almost globally in that like almost no other people were displaced. There isn't any other case of people being displaced like we were in mass, and the unique challenges we faced where we were displaced to. But yeah, it's like, so I don't think it has to do with a descendant of slaves, you know, like identification. It has to do with Americanism, like ADOS, like that's like the A at the beginning. That's the whole problem with identifying as African American, like, because it's like, why are you identifying as an American if you were in the tradition, the real black radical tradition of going back to Nat Turner? I don't think Nat Turner identified as an American. America has only ever stood for our oppression, um, and like to think that it could be rehabilitated, or that us black people could ever really be included in the American project is naivety at best. Um, we are definitely not included. Uh, like there's the classic Uncle Tom, Uncle Ruckus, for those who've watched the Boondocks, like uh, Uncle Ruckus character, that's like very much a real character in our uh, that's a kind of person in our communities. The coon, the self-hating black man. Just like there are Native communities in all other, in Asian communities, there's the self-hating Asian people, the colonial-minded Chicanos, it's in every community you have compradors, people with comprador sensibilities. Fanon wrote about this extensively um, in really all of his books, mostly Black Skin, White Masks, and Wretched of the Earth, how compradors adopt colonial sensibilities, because of colonialism. It's a result of colonialism. So yeah, definitely, like, there's no there's it is a prolific uh phenomena in the Black community, as it is in other communities. How much well, I'm sure. I think you noted that it's going to be a talking point in the interview. We'll talk about compradors. Like, sometimes it seems like the only thing standing between us and decolonization is the compradors. So yeah, obviously it's an important issue.
I have a question for Carlos. Do you think there's a distinction between ADOs and the compradors, or do you think that's the same category? 'Cause the term ADOs, I've heard it here and there, but I don't really know.
The
What does it
problem
stand
with
for?
ADOS is the A at the beginning.
What's
Definitely not
A?
the dose. Like, it's like it's not the the problem isn't being a descendant of slaves. It's being identifying as American.
Oh, so the
The
A
A,
stands for American.
the A is
Yeah, I think I butchered it because I was thinking like because at first I heard it like African American descendants of slave or chattel slavery. So I've heard different hashtags or different versions of it. But I do
Mhm.
think Derek's right. Like American descendant of slave is the one that stuck because another big hashtag that they were using was like cut the check. Because the first time I heard about them was essentially advocating for reparations, right?
Mm.
Financially, which is justified. I mean, of course, right? It's not. I don't. It's not going to fix anything, but it's justice as close as you can get. Fundamentally, I believe that land is the only way to address it, and that if you just give a financial compensation, the capitalist system, everything is going to adjust to
The seller
continue
state
to.
still exists.
It will still exist, but it's not like you're going to see the enrichment of the Black community because capitalists will adjust, whether it's through inflation or any other
Yeah.
mechanism, in order to maintain new Africans as proletariat, like
Yeah.
subjugated, exploited class.
Yeah, like in the seller colonial system will still stay in place. I mean, the power structures will stay the same. You said we have more money. The same thing the same conversations have or had when during within indigenous communities. It's like we don't want your money, we want our land back, like all of it. So you can't just say here's some money for what you say. So I do think for the biggest reparation to be had is our liberation, right? It's for us to create a decolonial government, decolonial state where we make our own decisions, right? Because if we say, hey, Europeans, like, give us more money, and it's just like, no, fuck you, right? It's not gonna fix anything.
Yeah, it's like we're asking for a piece of what we should. It's a half measure, a concession. It's a concession to just ask for. Obviously, that's a liberal thing. The just asking for reparations. It's like, obviously there's a distinction from liberal Black people who ask for reparations and Black nationalists, such as myself.
Mhm.
The Black Panthers, the AAPRP. Like, we're all Black nationalists. Like, we're not just asking for reparations. Like, we're asking for sovereignty and nationhood,
Yeah,
and self-determination.
I think
Right?
that's the issue with my thing with white seller Marxists is that they see Black liberation as like Black people being inclusiveness into this, colonial Marxist project, right? Like, oh, they'll be free once we overthrow capitalism. But it's just like, no, they need their own sovereignty too, just like indigenous nations do. And because, like, for example, I bring up, like, there's a law, it's called the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, right? And this law is to make sure Indian children stay within native communities, right? Because what did white people do? They took native children and they put them in boarding school and assimilated, right, whole generations of native people into colonial society. But there's another group of people that went to the same shit, not like boarding schools, but you know, black children, went through the colonizing too. And what do white people like to do? It's adopt black children and then assimilate them to American colonial life. I really do think with sovereignty, the black community can protect their own children too. This is something that they should demand for their children not to be assimilated or adopted by white people. It's like all these like people, celebrities going to Africa and being white saviors, adopting black children. What the fuck is that? That's fucking bullshit. Or people like going to China and adopting, Chinese children. That's the same thing. It's fucking white saviorisms. Like native people see that and we're like, what the fuck's going on here? Like Angelina Jolie adopting an Asian, kid, and it's just like, let's.
Yeah, they adopt a lot of Korean kids too.
Yeah,
it's like it's crazy. It's like
it's a pillar of colonization.
Yeah,
it's that them erasing like our culture, erasing our languages, or removing us from our communities and assimilating us. It's mental assimilation. It's a form of genocide. And we wonder why we have a lot of compradors with it. Even the native community, like a lot of natives are like people think that all native people are they think the same. No, we have native people that are Trumpers, right? That are hardcore, especially the older generation. Younger generation is pretty good. They're moving away from Christianity and being hardcore Christian. But the old school generations that actually experience boarding school, they are very religious, right? And I see that even within the black communities, like hardcore Christians. And, we have to understand that we need to have these conversations among both our communities in order to decolonize, because Christianity is a pillar 100% of solar colonization. That, in my point of view, Christianity needs to be either heavily regulated like it is in DPRK, or it needs to be totally abolished from this continent, because Christian zealots always sneak back. They always want to bring the Eurocentrism with them. The whole religion, in my point of view, is that colonizing religion. From the very inception of that religion, it's all about colonizing. So in Christianity, you have to, convert other people to go into heaven. It's like bringing fruit.
They're supposed to evangelize. Yeah,
evangelize other people, and that's why Christianity is so widespread throughout the world. And they destroy other people's cultures. Like they burned the Library of Alexandria because it was not Christian. It didn't promote Christianity, ways of thoughts. So they burn other people's histories, other cultures, other spiritualities, and then they claim themselves as the truth. That's fucking stupid in my point of view. So, but I don't want to go change the subject from your question, but I just putting that in there, that the native community and black community do have similarities on that. The compradors.
No, absolutely, and that's why I have both of you on today. I did want to kind of highlight with the ADOS movement, like again, even if let's say they cut the check, right, and you get the financial reparations, just as these white supremacist settlers were eventually willing to end segregation. If they cut the check, you're going to see the same result, where they're going to use it against you, right? If the black community is still subjugated and still exploited, they're going to use the same tactic that they use, the same talking points. Oh, well, segregation is over. That's not holding you back. Look at your communities. And then you see the racism. It's like, oh, it's you. It's genetically these people are committing more crime, this and that, because they use the end of segregation as the excuse to not address the other oppressive systems being inflicted upon black communities. If they cut the check, if they give you the reparations financially, solely financially, whatever struggles that the black community is still going to go through, it's going to be ignored, and then the reparations check is going to be used as an excuse, as a cover to not hold these white supremacists accountable. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but essentially it's going to be weaponized.
Yeah, like I was saying, like I don't even think reparations would ever happen legislatively in this country. That and yeah, like those of us of the revolutionary, of the black radical tradition, none of us are asking for reparations. We're asking for nation sovereignty and self determination and nationhood, and we're not asking for half measures like reparations, definitely, and that's definitely like you're saying. That's it's a liberal. That's a like liberal, black liberal uh, political goal to attain reparation, to get a one time check for centuries of suffering and subjugation, which is not enough. So yeah, exactly to your point.
Yeah, and furthermore, like just the it's inherently anti-black as well. Like this movement, right? The ADOS movement is inherently anti-black because it's not a um, like Pan African approach to things. It's very much of the America, right? Aspect of it is we don't want these Haitian immigrants. We don't want these African immigrants. We don't want like it is inherently xenophobic because it's rooted fundamentally in a right wing, white nationalist ideology, which it's there's no way you can convince me that this wasn't like some type of psyop, right? To essentially destroy any lasting vestige of black unity, right? Black radical unity, I should say.
Yeah, definitely in our all real black radicals draw from Haiti, and Haiti was a black republic. It wasn't if you were black, you had sovereignty, you had citizenship in Haiti, and that was the whole point of Haiti. And yeah, that's been the real standard for any real black revolutionary Pan Africanist. That has been the standard. I like what Julius Malema in the EFF in South Africa does a lot of good speaking on. Um, he takes a firm stance against xenophobia because that exists in South Africa as well. It exists on the continent where people will be xenophobic towards other African peoples coming across these borders that Europeans drew in the Berlin Conference. So it's like it's this exists on the continent as well, and Julius Malema and the EFF, they're fighting that there as well. This is a global fight against the the xenophobia that we inherited from colonial society.
Yeah, and it's so like inflicting self harm, like and nonsensical in the way that like for example, Malcolm X, who I don't know how much he's embraced in the ADOS circles. But it's funny because like his father was part of like a Marcus Garvey like political movement. So this idea that you can somehow isolate, you know, only you know Americans descendants of slavery without addressing the fact that like the Haitian Revolution, and I believe Gerald Horn talked about this, like influenced so much of like slave revolts. Like it's just interconnected. You cannot separate it, and to do so is just um, to self-inflict damage into any actual movement that combats white supremacy, which I guess is the whole comprador aspect of it all.
Yeah.
So I think we can wrap up with Rick. You mentioned a little bit, and obviously Derek, you jump in at any time. Um, because I'm certain that you guys have seen different perspectives of this and have different intimate experience with it. Where, as Rick mentioned, like the patriotism or the American allegiance within Native communities. I think the something that Rick mentioned before was like you see the American flag in like powwows and gatherings.
Yeah, I think that's the issue we have with like a lot of, like I said, we have natives, that are Trumpers, or like they just are just liberals, in general. And I think that um I see a lot of like. Let me go back a little bit. So let me tell you a story. One time I asked the chairman of the Comanche Nation, I was a general counsel, and I asked him, how do you envision, what's your vision of decolonization? And I saw how he paused, right? And he like grabbed me by the shoulder softly, and he was like, "You're thinking too far ahead." And I was like, "Oh my God. Like this is the chairman of the Comanche Nation. He has graduate degree. He's smart as fuck. A lot of people cite him in Indian country. And is that your answer? That was unacceptable in my point of view, right? And I see a lot of I see our sovereignty getting stronger, but I don't think it's going to the right direction. And I always talk about the vanguard being indigenous nations, and I do agree with that. But even within our own indigenous communities, we critique the roles or where the indigenous governments are heading themselves, right? If you read Glenn Cohort, Tayaki Alfred, Howard Adams, these people heavily critiqued. I know they're in Canada, right? These decolonial authors are in Canada, but those same critiques apply to the U.S. indigenous governments in the U.S., right? And if you read Peace, Power, and Righteousness by Tayaki Alfred, you can see the critiques, Howard Adams and Glenn Cohort. And this is the reason I keep saying that, because we do critique ourselves, but we don't need settlers telling us how to run our governments, right? But the thing is like indigenous governments, in my point of view, should be fighting for decolonization. I mean, they've done a good job since the 60s about, running infrastructure, but the priorities need to be, the tactics have to change, right? And, there's only so much we can do without the help of settler. I spoke about this with Tayaki Alfred a week ago. The last episode I posted, it was about Wasase. We spoke about this. Like, we've done a lot as indigenous nations to promote, to run infrastructure for economies, but we just need sellers to get in their shit. We need to, please organize yourselves better. First off, educate yourselves better than organizing, because you can't really organize without, good education. Just like Lenin said, I repeat it again, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement, right? So we need settlers. This is why I'm so adamant of the podcast and talking about revolutionary theory, is because we need settler allies. We need settler organizations that are ready to be in solidarity with indigenous nations. And that's the only way forward, and I do think that unless we see that happening, then we as indigenous nations are going to be stuck just running the infrastructure, but not really moving forward, because realistically we can't go to war with the US government. It's fucking impossible. We're so low in numbers, right? We need the three factions together: the indigenous peoples, the Black community, and New Africa, and we need settler Marxists together, all together, working in unison in order to move forward, right? And if we don't have that, we don't have one of the three are decolonial factions not working well, then it's going to be really hard for the other two to work together. This is why we have to address compradors within our own communities, because this is why in the last 15 years, you see a lot of like compradors in right-wing media, and I think like, for example, Candace Owens is one of them, right? Where I think she excused Hitler or something like that. She excused Hitler. And I think the settler state itself uses, tokenizes people in our community for promoting settler colonization. So when we, as radical Black or indigenous peoples, speak about decolonization, they have their compradors in place as pawns to say that person's too extreme, right? Or I don't agree with that. This is why I'm very wary of anybody. This is not just white settlers. Anybody, especially indigenous peoples, that say I'm too extreme. I am not too extreme. To me, too extreme is like saying you're going to hunt white people for sport. That's extreme. Like for reals. But I think anybody that fights or challenges our opinion on this, our stance on this, shows me either you're a fucking agent or you're just a comprador, right? Claire, you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to say, like the Candace Owens, for those who don't know Black American history, Black history in America, she's no different. Her, the Colin Powell, Obama, like they're all in this lineage of, like so. When W.E.B. Du Bois was first, coming about, it was there was a basically he and Booker T. Washington were vying for basically leadership of the Black American community. Of course, W.E.B. Du Bois won out in that battle, and but Booker T. Washington was, he was advocating for Black people to assimilate into white colonial society, to work our way up through the system. All the so all this stuff, all the Candace Owens, the Clarence Thomases, like all the Black conservatives or even the Black liberals, they're all of this same uh, lineage of thought that just comes from Booker T. Washington. It's not really very different from, Booker T. Um, that's like it when you're studying his history, Black history here. That's like usually the first thing. You'll learn about slave revolts, and like when it comes to like the beginning of like the black the kind of cohesive Black movements in on this continent. They'll talk about obviously Du Bois, like who's like almost the the founder of Pan-Africanism, basically, along with, I guess you could say, Marcus Garvey, but like Du Bois obviously much more sophisticated, as much as Garvey can be credited with uh, Pan-African thought. Du Bois definitely uh, was really the first in the lineage of Black radical theory, and uh, so that's like usually one of the first things you learn about is between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and that debate.
I do want to say that if you read Howard Adams when it comes to Commodores, he addresses Commodores and even like native organizations that are worse than settler organizations, right? And I think that's page, that's it. It's in Prison of Grass by Howard Adams. And it's on page 161. So he talks about goon squad type shit, right? And that's something that I've witnessed within myself, that this indigenous, you have to. I try not to critique other indigenous peoples too hard, but because I don't want people to think, oh, I'm just like everybody. Because I do think we should, listen to indigenous peoples. But there's some native people that just promote nonsense, like renegotiation of treaties. Right, renegotiation of treaties is just it's promoting two-state solution type shit. It's not decolonization. Okay, that's like that's something that I don't agree with. And some of these native quote unquote revolutionary people started just tailing me and Derek after they started noticing, critiquing their positions pretty hard on their liberalism, right? And I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to see a lot of people that are just tailing me and Derek. Derek and the other cadre, because everybody wants to be, a fucking Marxist online celebrity, right? Oh, you weren't there. You weren't there. I was with Matt, and I went to the function at Midnight Books and the opening, and I said, how many people here? Do you notice how many people here recognize me? I think it was like some people from the Brown Bears, but because they met me in person. But there was like a ton of people, and nobody knew who the fuck I was, right? Because I'm not trying to be a celebrity, right? And I like it that way. And I think that's my thing. Well, all of this is we have even native people and that are trying to be celebrities in the imperial core, and they end up just sometimes they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and they're just saying, oh, I'm a decolonial theorist, and they talk nonsense. Like these motherfuckers have never read any of these, theorists, and they're not even Marxists. I'm not saying you have to be a Marxist, but they don't even understand Marxism and how to bridge the gap between, settler Marxists and decolonial, radicals, colonized peoples, and merge them together. I think that's what me and Derek are doing, merging these two together and creating this theory to move forward to have a real decolonial movement, so people can get to the, get to the fucking on the same page, and it's just to set the standard where it should be, not set the standard higher. It should be higher, but where it should be for revolutionary theory, right? And I think that a lot of people don't like admitting that they're wrong or they have something to learn. Everybody online, for some reason, these influencers, they feel like if they say openly say, hey, I don't know this, they're gonna lose people. But I think they should say that. Carlos, you said that, right? And what they're doing is they're using their followers as money. So like, oh, I have a lot of followers and it can't, say that I don't know much, so I'm gonna lose my followers, thus I'm gonna lose my money, the revenue. And so that's not revolutionary action, right? Me and Derek have never opened up a Patreon, right? We're doing this all for free, doing all this research for free, putting all this for free, doing lectures for, stellar Marxist organizations about, all these different topics. I think you were in one of them, weren't you? I don't know. Where were you? Oh, no, I don't think you were, Carlos, but, I go to all these functions and teach people. And never, people always ask me, oh, can I give you some money? No. Right? No. And I think that's what that's the problem with all these like quote unquote Marxists online is, one, they're trying to do it for money, and two, for clout, but clout equals money in positions, right? And doing it for clout it's a fucking wrong reason. Like nobody in their right mind wants to be a Marxist celebrity in the imperial capitalist core. Right? Who wants to do that? So you want to get assassinated? That's how you get assassinated, right? Like that's not I'm afraid to get assassinated. Like I'm not trying to show my face out there because there's always one motherfucker that takes you a little bit too far, and then there goes your life. I mean, John Lennon got assassinated for fucking dumb shit, right? So we're talking about real shit. So I don't. We have to have security culture, and all these Marxists online are like, look at me, look how badass I am, and look at me, I'm hanging out with Chris Smalls from Amazon, and look at me, I'm having beers with, what's his name, Cornel West. All these people are fucking liberals. They're not revolutionary. They're fucking liberals. They're fake Marxist fucking celebrities that don't really do shit. They don't talk about the actual contradictions. They're not the colonial motherfuckers, They can talk the talk and give some talking points, but they're not doing anything worthwhile. They're just there for show as some kind of opposition, but they're not really opposing shit.
100%. And I think it's fucking ridiculous and despicable the fact that you see, indigenous people, black people, actual organizers, people that are doing real education work, and they're not asking for money, but you see these fucking white boys, these white men, because we infantilize them way too much, which allows them to not be held accountable. These white men who are doing half the work, who know less than half about the subject and materials that they're profiting from, asking working class people for money. Like, how does that make any sense? I mean, that reveals the fact that there are people that actually care about doing the work, and those that are only interested in profiting off the work. And it's just despicable. It doesn't make any sense. Without a doubt, all these white male streamers grew up more comfortable with more opportunities, with more privilege, with everything more than we did. And we're not here asking for money, and yet they are. And they want more of your money. That's insanity for me. That's just, they're shameless opportunists. I don't give a fuck if you're a grifter. I don't care if you actually believe what you're spewing, but you're an opportunist regardless. You're seeing how desperate people are for information, for knowledge, to feel like they're actually participating, getting involved in like action. You're seeing that, and you're taking advantage of those people, and then asking them for money. Instead of saying, keep your money, go join a local organization, and whatever money you're going to be donating to me, use it to help your organization, do something to get off your ass.
I do want to say something. Like I want to share a story. Is that a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago, Derek and I were Fed jacketed, which means that they were calling us feds. And the reason why this settler millionaire that's an heir to the Cox Corporation did this is because him and his buddies were saying that talking about settlers too much, it sounds like an op. I was like, you're talking to a black and indigenous person talking about settler colonization. You're calling us an op. So these motherfuckers went across the internet and called us federal agents for talking about settler colonization and decolonization, right? And later on, when the Palestinian shit happened, like this white rich millionaire motherfucker converted to Islam, right? He's a white motherfucker that converted to Islam and then spearheaded a fucking a social media page called Palestinian Action US, and it was just a bunch of white people, talking about fucking liberation of Palestine, from the US. None of these people in this organization was Palestinian. So here we have white people that like center themselves, that just spent like a year, 2 years calling me and Derek about, to calling us feds, to turning around 180 within like a fucking week, then saying that, hey, I'm for decolonization of Palestine. What the fuck gives? This is why I don't trust settlers at all. Another story, we have Rainer Shea. Rainer Shea used to be part of our circle, right? And Rainer Shea thought he was this like the colonial Marxist, blah blah blah, a comrade, an ally, blah blah blah. He debated Haas on Haas's stream about decolonization, and Rainer spoke out of line. First off, Rainer shouldn't be the one discussing it because Rainer's white, right? But Rainer didn't tell us, he didn't tell anybody, hey, you want to come on with me to have an indigenous person on to talk about this? Rainer never did that. What Rainer did was debate Haas one-on-one, right? And he spoke nonsense. Like, he didn't ask us questions. He just went in there talking nonsense. And then we tried to teach Rainer here and there. Rainer still stayed a friend. I was about to meet Rainer in person, and the Rainer declined. He just went blank. He came back out of that quiet mode like 2 weeks later, straight up supporting Midwestern Marx, and now supporting white nationalists this week. You saw it in Carlos on Twitter, right? Like, this motherfucker went from 3 years ago being an ally of decolonization, indigenous peoples, and black people to now supporting white supremacists openly. That's fucking scary, man. That's super fucking scary. You wonder why I don't invite white motherfuckers to my house? This is why. This is why, right? Because I don't trust this shit. Like, one day you're a friend, the next day you're a fucking Nazi. No, I'm sorry. And same thing with white people. One day fed jacketing us, and the next day they're centering themselves in this conversation. You shouldn't be centered. Just like we talked about an hour and a half earlier, 2 hours earlier. You shouldn't be centered. I'm sorry. You should shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up and, and listen and learn and be an ally that way. You know what I'm saying? But here, that's the problem we have, is that me and Derek have been blacklisted, and, from the left spaces, because we're telling people, shut the fuck up. You're wrong. And that's nothing bad to say. You should shut the fuck up, right? That's in all non-European society, cultures, as you're growing up, you shut the fuck up, you listen and learn, and then when you get older and you know your stuff, you teach other people's, the younger generation, the culture, and they shut up and they ask questions, and then they teach the culture. For Americans in this hyper individualist culture, everybody wants to be a celebrity, everybody wants to be the fucking leader, everybody wants to be a fucking Lenin, right? But nobody knows how to just be a comrade. Right? There should be a regular person just to say, hey, I don't know about this. Teach me. No, they don't. Everyone wants to be the head of the pack, and they're like, teach me while I'm the head of the pack. No, fuck you. Why don't you say, hey, Rick and Derek and everybody, these other people are teaching you stuff. They don't. That's the problem we have in our hands. Is nobody can say, hey, go listen to those two motherfuckers in their circle because they have really good analysis on the situation. Right. And this is my grudge. This is my grudge because it's, we're here doing this for free, but people are taking advantage of us and then blacklisting us at the same time. They're listening to our podcast. I had people that quote unquote call themselves decolonial theorists, right? They talk shit about me behind my back, but they admitted to me in a phone call that they listen to my episodes 2 or 3 times in a row to take notes for Twitter fucking posts. They told me this in person, right? Like, you're telling me you listen to my podcast to a fucking to make Twitter posts, but you can't say Twitter posts. I learned this from Rick.
They
Like,
discovered your podcast, Rick.
that's fucking plagiarism,
Yeah.
right? It's intellectual plagiarism. A lot of people are doing that shit with me. They're just taking my shit. It's funny. I always tell people, you can like not quote me or not give me credit, but at the end of the day, I'm still shaping theory. I'm still the one. We're me and Derek and the rest of the group, the small group. We're still shaping theory because you're still tailing us, right? And not to be some cocky or conceited, but just come on, let's be real right now, right?
No,
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say be cocky, be arrogant, because these motherfuckers have do nothing and are exactly that. And that white male mindset is exactly that. I was always self-conscious about like, why am I even grabbing a mic? Why am I even speaking when I have so much to learn? And I'm like, holy shit, that whole idea of like have the confidence of a mediocre white man, like as liberal and cliche and cringy as that is, like why is it always us that have to be humble? Why is it always us with the imposter syndrome? And these motherfuckers are out here acting like they're fucking revolutionaries and that should be getting paid for it, right? For their nonsense. It's ridiculous. And it is settler arrogance. It is this white savior mindset that they believe that they can actually be leaders of revolution. It's typical bullshit.
Yeah. That's exactly 100%. And this is why, like, when I meet people like Derek or other people in our group like that understand and that I don't have to explain shit, and they 100%. I learned from them. Like, I'm not a know-it-all. Like, I learned a lot from Derek, and I think revolutionary theory is not like, it shouldn't be in academia, right? Because academia has its own white institution, right? Theory is like an everyday person theory, right? It's everyday person. Everybody should understand this theory. You shouldn't go to academia to learn revolutionary theory, right? So I think that because I have like I said, I have a law degree, but the very little that they covered in university was garbage compared to what I learned on my own, right? The university system is fucking garbage when it comes to revolutionary theory. They water everything down, right? And the best motherfuckers that I know that know about revolutionary theory or their concepts, none of these motherfuckers learned it from university. They all learned it on their own, right? So it's not about having education or higher education. It's about understanding and being a real motherfucker, and that's what I respect.
Absolutely. Well, Derek, you have anything to add? No pressure either.
Oh no, I mean, yeah, there's we could talk all night about the grifters and stuff. I think Rick covered it pretty well.
For sure. I think
Very well.
he always does. And there's a reason why he's let's be honest, disliked so much. He's unapologetic with it, as it should be, man. Like a lot of these white people complain that, oh, you're coming off arrogant, you're too aggressive, you're a bully, this and that. It's like, yo, like, well, we're not fucking playing games here. And as Rick mentioned earlier, like, this gets exhausting because it's so repetitive. Yeah. You're having the same conversations. I'll tell you personally, like, me and Rick initially before meeting each other did, have like a little bump of heads. But I'm like, I don't know how comfortable you have to grow up to where you need every conversation, every interaction to be like your hand being held through it. Like, how?
Not only that though, but when we met in person, like, we were fine. We were like, oh, we know it's just a misunderstanding. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is that nobody approaches me the right way. They approached me fucking disrespectfully. And I'm Comanche. I'm sorry. I will handle you disrespectfully back. I don't play that game. Come at me like, I'm talking in a good way. Come at me in a good way. Let's sit down and have a meal and let's have conversations, right? If you hate me because of my whatever my attitude or whatever the fuck, I'm not taking your shit. That's on you. It's not on me. But if you come at me, you say, hey, let's hash this shit out. Let's have a meal. I can say, okay, I disagree with you. We don't have to work together, but at least we know we can talk things out, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people don't do that shit. So, but with you, Carlos, it's different because I get along with you. We shoot the shit in person. You joke around. And I think you yourself, you are yourself in person. Like, you don't try to be, this, fake motherfucker when I met you. So, like, it's one of those things.
Hey, Rick, how long did it take me to start fucking talking shit at you and roasting you, bro? Like, immediate. Which, I mean, man, like, there's no time to pretend to be fake. There's no time to, try to be this whole, like, what do they call it? Like, when it's all about, like, your tone, like tone policing and shit like that. Like, bro, like, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology. I'm not doing shit with it. My goal is to work with children in the immigration process, get my social work degree on that. That's awesome, great. But I'm a blue collar worker right now. Like, I'm working with some real fucking like animals. I was gonna say savages here. I apologize there. Like, with real motherfuckers who are essentially, like, to the right, because that's what the education system teaches us, right? To essentially be like little right wingers. And like, none of them are PC in any way. None of them are filtering themselves. They're all honest and they're all upfront. And you have to match that fucking energy and be just as ruthless in these conversations when you're in the break room. So I don't have that patience. I don't have that filter. I don't have that pretend niceness, because it's not effective when you're talking to real fucking working class people. That's the way I am.
Not tolerate shit either.
Yeah, and that's like a white thing, right? The passive aggressive, like, kind of like try to dance around a subject, like, because can't handle like confrontation and stuff. Like, it's all that's definitely all rooted in colonial society and what we deal with these passive aggressive white grifters and stuff.
What's that phrase? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry. What did you say?
It's when those there's a phrase in I don't know about
respectability politics, maybe.
No, yeah, the phrase where, like, white people, they smile you in your face, but they're also stabbing you with the other hand or some shit like that. They're stabbing you while they're smiling at you in your face, and it's just like, that's something that I'm just like,
Oh, yeah,
I don't play that shit.
Yeah. And I guess if I don't know if we're wrapping up the convo, but I do like to, like, always bring it around to, like, in the spirit of internationalism, Pan-Africanism, and global decolonization. Like Rick's saying, like, decolonization is a global movement. Like, and we should all colonized people, we should all be supporting each other, and anyone who's an ally of colonized people should be supporting the global movement for decolonization wherever that's happening. It's happening on multiple fronts in us, so-called Australia, so-called New Zealand, from Hawaii to Guam to the Western Hemisphere, as it's called, in relation to Europe, but like, and also in Asia and Africa. Like, if you do your due diligence and you read, the stuff that it didn't take long for someone to tell me to read Black Bolshevik. And the fact that I have to, like, keep repeating things that are clearly written in that book about the colonial situation and the white communists being chauvinists and not getting it when it came to the national question in South Africa, because they're like, well, white people, this is white people's land too, right? Because it's a settler colony. It's like, no, it's not. You don't get a state. You don't get a nation. Like, you Boers, this isn't your land. Like, it's like the same in Israel, like in labor Zionism, which was a huge part of, like, this whole thing of, like, oh, well, I'm a proletariat, like, I'm a working class. Like, it's like, there's a lot of working class Israelis who were part of the process of, who are the foot soldiers of colonization. And if you're a colonizer in a settler colony, unless you're actively working against colonization, you are a foot soldier, an agent of colonialism. So this happens in every situation. We have these communist parties in Israel, in South Africa, in Australia, in the United States, in Canada, who are chauvinists and racists, and it's in their party, it's written into their party program and their answer to the national question. Usually it's pretty vague to dance around the fact that they're like, white people get to have a state too, a proletarian state. And it's like, this has been a problem even since the USSR with the Russian chauvinists who maintain their colonial attitude after the Tsar is overthrown, because as much as probably Marxists, I think Marxists completely avoid this for the fact of, you know, you could blame all the anti-communist propaganda, but like we have to be we have to be materialists. We have to address reality, which is Russia is a settler colony to this day. Russia occupies Siberia. Siberia isn't Russia. Like, the Russians settler colonized Siberia in the 1600s. It's not Russia. Like, ethnic Russians are not indigenous to Georgia or to Siberia or to anywhere else they settler colonized during the period of the Russian Empire. And that's contradictions that weren't dealt with and led to the collapse of the USSR. It's quite clear. It's evident. It's demonstrably true that like imperialists were able to sabotage the USSR because the USSR did not deal with its colonial contradictions. It had a very weak policy at the end of Lenin's life of colonization, of indigenization, and that was like pretty much the extent of it. And they abandoned that program, and it didn't really even work. So it's like it's a half measure, and it even failed as a half measure. So this has been a problem in the communist movement since its beginning. It's detailed really well in that book that Rick introduced us all to, Robert Beale's book, Eurocentrism and the Communist Movement. Yeah, Black Bolshevik, they write about it. Harry Haywood writes about it. And yeah, it's like you got to do the reading. Everyone's got to do their due diligence. Our cadres need to be educated. And thank you, Carlos, for contributing to that, helping us educate our cadres.
Appreciate it. I appreciate y'all. Thank you. I feel very fortunate. I know Rick mentioned that he tried like setting this up prior. I'm telling you, like, I can come off as an arrogant, like cocky motherfucker, but at the end of the day, when I'm, interacting with knowledgeable people that do the work, like, I'm humble as anybody else. And I told Rick, I'm like, hey, give me a minute, let me get my shit together, because I don't want to waste your time, because the time that y'all put into this, into educating yourselves, into educating others, is so valuable. I look up to y'all, respect, like nothing but respect. I look up to you, and you're a great example. And I hope to like get white people as upset at me as they are to you. So I appreciate y'all for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, check out Decolonized Buffalo, post scarcity. If you're new here and you want to hear somebody talk shit about Eurocentric fucking opportunists, you'll never hear me ask for money just for fucking flapping my gums. I appreciate y'all. Take care.
Are we still on the air? I can't hear you.